Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Lisa Gonzalez, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Black Hills National Forest, South Dakota, 3 summers ago. What started as a much-needed break from my demanding job in Minneapolis turned into something I still struggled to comprehend, let alone explain to others. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at a marketing firm for nearly 2 years straight. Burnout doesn't begin to describe what I was feeling. When my therapist suggested I disconnect completely, no phone, no email, no social media, I initially laughed, but the idea took root. A week alone in nature, just me and the wilderness. I'd always considered myself reasonably outdoorsy. Weekend hikes at state parks, the occasional camping trip with friends. Nothing extreme, but I wasn't a complete novice either. The Black Hills seemed perfect. Beautiful, but not overwhelmingly remote. Popular enough that I wouldn't be completely isolated, yet vast enough to find solitude. I planned a 5-day solo backpacking trip along the Centennial Trail, particularly the northern section near Nemo. I'd read it was less crowded there, with spectacular views of limestone formations and dense ponderosa pine forests. The trail would take me past Steamboat Rock and the old mining settlements that dotted the area. I was particularly excited to visit Victoria Creek, which I'd read had crystal-clear waters perfect for filtering and drinking. The morning I set out was perfect. Crisp air, clear skies, the scent of pine so strong it felt cleansing just to breathe it in. I parked at the Pilot Knob trailhead, shouldered my pack, and set off with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. The rhythm of my boots on the dirt path, the gentle rustle of wind through the pines, occasional glimpses of deer watching cautiously from the tree line. By mid-afternoon, I'd covered about 8 miles and found a perfect camping spot near Elk Creek. I set up my tent in a small clearing, gathered firewood, and prepared a simple dinner as the sun began its descent behind the hills. The sunset painted the sky in vibrant oranges and purples, and as darkness fell, I sat by my small fire, feeling more peaceful than I had in years. That's when I first noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent. If you've spent any time outdoors, you know that forests are never truly quiet. There's always something: birds, insects, the scurrying of small animals, distant calls. But suddenly, there was nothing. Not even the crackling of my fire seemed to penetrate the unnatural stillness that had descended. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a predator nearby causing the wildlife to go quiet. I doused my fire and retreated to my tent earlier than planned, suddenly feeling exposed under the vast night sky. Sleep came fitfully. I kept waking to what sounded like whispers just outside my tent. Soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to circle my campsite. Each time I sat up and turned on my headlamp, there was nothing there, and the sounds ceased immediately. Just before dawn, I woke to what I was certain was a child's laughter, high-pitched and innocent, but terribly out of place this deep in the woods. I unzipped my tent with shaking hands and peered out into the gray pre-dawn light. The trees stood silent sentinels around my clearing, revealing nothing. I convinced myself it had been a dream and began preparing for the day. As I was breaking down my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A perfect circle of small white mushrooms had grown around my tent overnight. A fairy ring. I'm not superstitious, but something about it felt deliberate, as if I'd been marked somehow. I shouldered my pack and continued north on the trail, trying to shake off my uneasiness. The day was overcast now, the bright promise of yesterday replaced by a pewter sky that seemed to press down on the forest. Still, the physical exertion felt good, and by midday, I'd convinced myself that my imagination had simply run wild in an unfamiliar setting. Around 2 in the afternoon, I reached Victoria Creek and stopped to refill my water bottles. The creek wasn't the crystal-clear flow I'd expected. Instead, it ran murky and sluggish with an unpleasant mineral smell. Still, my filtration system would make it drinkable, and I needed to replenish my supply. As I knelt by the water, I glimpsed a reflection that wasn't my own. Just for a second. A pale face with hollow eyes watching me from the opposite bank. I jerked my head up, heart hammering, but saw only trees and rocks. No one was there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and insubstantial in the heavy air. No answer came. I finished filtering my water quickly and continued hiking, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The trail began to climb steadily, switchbacking up a steep hillside toward Flag Mountain. The exertion should have warmed me, but I felt increasingly cold, a chill that seemed to radiate from within rather than from the air around me. About a mile further, I came across a small wooden sign nailed to a tree that I didn't remember seeing on any of my maps. Crude letters had been carved into the weathered wood. Doll Creek Settlement. Keep out. There was no settlement marked on my maps in this area. I checked my GPS, but it showed nothing but wilderness for miles around. According to my coordinates, I was still on the Centennial Trail, though the path ahead looked less maintained than what I'd been following. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to continue forward, thinking perhaps it was an abandoned mining settlement. The Black Hills were full of ghost towns from the gold rush era. The trail narrowed significantly, in some places barely visible beneath the encroaching undergrowth. After about 20 minutes, the trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a small clearing. What I saw stopped me cold. 6 small cabins formed a rough semicircle around a central fire pit. They looked ancient. The logs blackened with age, roofs partially collapsed, windows dark, empty sockets. But that wasn't what caused my breath to catch in my throat. The cabins looked inhabited. Smoke rose from one chimney. Laundry hung on a line between 2 structures. A rocking chair on one porch swayed gently, as if someone had just left it. Yet there wasn't a soul in sight. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to go back to the main trail and forget I'd ever seen this place. But before I could retreat, a voice spoke from directly behind me. "You shouldn't be here, miss." I spun around to face an elderly man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that seemed oddly dated. Not quite modern, but not historical either. Something about them seemed wrong, though I couldn't place exactly what. His face was deeply lined, eyes a pale blue that bordered on colorless. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I saw the sign, but thought this might be a historical site. I'm just hiking through." The man studied me for an uncomfortably long moment. "Doll Creek ain't no tourist spot. Best you get back to the main trail before sundown." He glanced at the sky. "You got about 3 hours. If you hurry, you can make it to Pilot Knob Shelter." "Pilot Knob? But that's where I started yesterday." The man's expression didn't change. Trail loops back on itself sometimes, especially for those who don't belong. Before I could respond, a door slammed somewhere in the settlement. The man's eyes flicked toward the sound, and something like fear crossed his weathered face. "Go now," he said, voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Don't look back. Don't stop for nothing. Stay on the main trail. If you hear voices calling, ignore them. They ain't who they pretend to be." "Who's they?" I asked, a chill running down my spine despite the afternoon warmth. The old man shook his head. "No time. Just remember, if you see a little girl, whatever you do, don't follow her, no matter what she says or how she cries." A woman's voice called from one of the cabins. A name, perhaps, though it sounded more like a resonant hum than actual words. The old man's face drained of what little color it had. "Run," he whispered. "Now." Something in his eyes convinced me. I turned and fled back the way I had come, branches whipping at my face as I half ran, half stumbled down the narrow path. Behind me, I heard what might have been voices raised in argument. Then a sound I can only describe as a wail. Not quite human, not quite animal, but filled with such malevolence that it sent me sprinting despite my heavy pack. I didn't stop until I reached the junction with the main trail, my lungs burning and legs trembling with exertion. There was no sign that anyone had followed me. The woods had returned to their normal state, birds calling, insects buzzing, the gentle sway of branches in the breeze. I checked my map and GPS again. According to my coordinates, I had indeed somehow looped back toward my starting point, though I'd been certain I was heading north all day. Disoriented and unsettled, I decided to make camp at the next suitable location. I needed to rest and recalibrate before continuing. 2 miles further, I found a small clearing near a stream. Not ideal, but I was too exhausted to be picky. I set up camp with mechanical efficiency, my mind still racing with questions about the settlement and the old man's warning. As I prepared my dinner, I realized my hands were shaking, not from exertion, but from a deep, primal fear I couldn't entirely explain. Night fell quickly among the dense pines. I built my fire larger than necessary, taking comfort in its warm circle of light. Every sound from the darkness beyond made me jump. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, what might have been distant footsteps on the trail. I was just about to retreat to my tent when I heard it, a child's voice, clear as a bell, coming from somewhere in the trees. "Help me. Please help me." I froze, the old man's warning echoing in my mind. If you see a little girl, whatever you do, don't follow her. "Is someone there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. A small figure emerged at the edge of my firelight, a girl no more than 8 years old wearing a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her dark hair hung in limp strands around a pale face. Even from a distance, I could see she was barefoot and shivering. "I'm lost," she said, her voice trembling. "Can you help me find my daddy?" Everything about the situation felt wrong. A child alone in these woods at night, miles from any road or campground? Impossible. And yet, there she stood, looking so vulnerable and afraid that my heart ached despite my suspicion. "Where did you last see your father?" I asked, remaining where I was. The girl pointed vaguely into the darkness. "Just over there. We were picking berries and I wandered off." A tear slid down her cheek. "Please, I'm scared of the dark." I remembered the old man's urgency, the fear in his eyes. They ain't who they pretend to be. "What's your name?" I asked, stalling as I tried to decide what to do. The girl hesitated just a fraction too long. "Sarah," she said finally. "Well, Sarah, why don't you come sit by the fire while I pack up some supplies? Then we can go look for your dad together." The girl's face brightened, but she didn't move closer. "Can you come help me? I hurt my ankle when I fell." I stood up slowly, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. "I have a first aid kit in my tent. Let me get it." As I turned toward my tent, I heard a sound that froze my blood, not from the girl, but from behind me, from my campfire. A low, rumbling growl, like no animal I'd ever heard. I spun back around. The girl still stood at the edge of the firelight, but her posture had changed. She stood perfectly straight now, no sign of any injury. And she was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across her face. "What's wrong, Lisa?" she asked, her voice suddenly deeper, resonant with something ancient and malevolent. "Don't you want to help me?" She knew my name, a name I hadn't told her. Behind her, more figures began to emerge from the darkness, vague, shadowy forms that seemed to flicker and shift as they moved. They didn't look quite solid, nor quite human in their proportions. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed my backpack, not bothering with the tent or the rest of my gear, and ran in the opposite direction back toward the trail. Behind me, the girl's laughter changed, morphing into that same inhuman wail I'd heard at the settlement. I ran blindly through the dark forest, guided only by my headlamp's narrow beam and pure terror. Branches tore at my clothes and skin, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I didn't slow down. I could hear them behind me. Not footsteps, but a slithering rushing sound like wind through dead leaves. But faster, more purposeful. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to give out, but fear kept me moving. Eventually, I broke through the trees onto a dirt road, one that wasn't on any of my maps but looked well traveled. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and I flagged them down frantically beyond caring whether the approaching vehicle contained friend or foe. Anything was better than what pursued me through the darkness. The truck, an old Ford pickup, screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, a middle-aged woman with concern etched on her weathered face, rolled down her window. "Good Lord, girl, what happened to you?" I must have looked deranged, scratched, dirty, wide-eyed with terror. "Please," I gasped, "I need to get out of here." She didn't ask questions, just leaned across to push open the passenger door. "Get in." As I climbed into the truck, I glanced back toward the forest's edge. For just a moment, I thought I saw them. A line of shadowy figures standing unnaturally still among the trees. And at their center, the small white-clad figure of a girl, her face no longer resembling anything human. The woman followed my gaze but apparently saw nothing unusual. "You're safe now, honey," she said, putting the truck in gear. "Whatever spooked you, it's behind you now." If only that were true. The woman, Maggie Blackwell, I soon learned, was a local who lived just outside the small town of Nemo. She took me to her home, a cozy farmhouse where she lived alone since her husband's death 3 years earlier. She gave me coffee laced with whiskey to calm my nerves, then listened without interruption or judgment as I told her what had happened, leaving out only the most unbelievable details. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her own mug. "You encountered something up there on Flag Mountain," she said finally. "Something that's been in these hills a lot longer than any of us." "You believe me?" I asked, surprised. Maggie's eyes met mine. "The Black Hills are sacred to the Lakota. They call this place Paha Sapa, hills that are black. Black not just for the dense pines that make them look dark from a distance, but for other reasons too. Old reasons." She took a sip of her coffee. "Local folks know there are places in these hills you don't go after dark, places that don't always stay where they're supposed to be." "Like Doll Creek Settlement?" Maggie's mug stopped halfway to her lips. "Where did you hear that name?" I described the settlement I'd found, the old man who'd warned me. With each detail, Maggie's face grew paler. "Doll Creek burned to the ground in 1889, she said quietly. "All 6 families died in the fire. Some say it was an accident, a stove left unattended. Others say it was deliberate, that the settlers had disturbed something ancient buried in the creek bed while panning for gold." A cold weight settled in my stomach. But I saw it. Smoke from chimneys, laundry on the line. What you saw wasn't the settlement, at least not as it exists in our world. The boundaries between worlds thin in certain places. The Lakota shamans understood this. They had rituals to keep the doorways closed. Doorways to what? Maggie shook her head. "I don't have answers, just stories passed down. But I do know that what looks like a little girl in a white dress has been seen in these parts for over a century. Always near Doll Creek, always luring people into the woods." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They never come back." I spent that night at Maggie's house, sleeping fitfully despite my exhaustion. The next morning, she drove me to the Nemo Ranger Station to report my abandoned gear and get a ride back to my car at Pilot Knob. The ranger, a square-jawed man named Dave Ellison, listened to my sanitized story about getting lost and frightened, then leaving my gear behind in my panic. He didn't seem surprised. "Happens more often than you'd think," he said. "People underestimate these woods, how easy it is to get turned around." He studied my face. "You sure you're okay, ma'am? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. Just tired and embarrassed. I thought I was more experienced than this. Dave nodded, though I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, let's get you back to your vehicle. We can mark the location of your gear on the map, see if one of our patrols can recover it. I gave him approximate coordinates, though something told me they wouldn't find anything there. Some instinct warned me against leading anyone back to that spot. Before leaving, I asked casually about Doll Creek Settlement. Dave's reaction was more muted than Maggie's, but I caught the slight stiffening of his shoulders. "Old ghost story," he said dismissively. "Nothing there now but trees and rocks." "Have you ever had reports of a little girl in the woods? Maybe someone's child wandering off from a campsite?" Dave's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Just something I heard from another hiker on the trail," I lied. He seemed to choose his words carefully. "We get all sorts of reports. People see things in the wilderness. Tricks of light, animals that look like something else from a distance. Imagination fills in the gaps." It was clear he wasn't going to say more. I dropped the subject. The drive back to my car was tense with unspoken questions. When we reached the Pilot Knob trailhead, Dave handed me his card. "If you remember anything else about where you left your gear, give me a call," he said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "And Ms. Gonzalez, some parts of these hills, they're better left alone. Stick to the marked trails next time." I nodded, thanked him for the ride, and got into my car. As I drove away from the Black Hills, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Not physically, but like a shadow that had attached itself to my consciousness. In the weeks that followed, I tried to research Doll Creek Settlement. The historical records were sparse but confirmed what Maggie had told me. A small mining settlement that had mysteriously burned one night in 1889, with no survivors. A few old newspaper articles mentioned strange circumstances. How the bodies were found arranged in a circle in the center of the settlement. How despite the total destruction of the cabins, none of the surrounding forest had burned. One night, about a month after my return to Minneapolis, I woke to find my apartment unnaturally cold. On my bedroom wall, illuminated by the streetlight filtering through my curtains, was a perfect shadow of a small girl, though there was nothing in my room that could have cast such a shape. As I watched, frozen in terror, the shadow moved, not as if the object casting it had moved, but independently, turning its head slowly toward me. I could feel it looking at me, though it had no eyes. It raised one hand, a slow, beckoning gesture. From somewhere in my apartment, I heard a child's voice. "Don't you want to help me find my daddy, Lisa?" I moved out the next day, leaving most of my possessions behind. I've changed apartments twice more since then. Changed jobs, changed my phone number, but some nights I still wake to that unnatural cold, to the sound of whispering voices just beyond comprehension, to the shadowy figure of a small girl on my wall, always beckoning, always calling me back to the dark hills where something ancient waits. And sometimes, in my dreams, I see the old man from Doll Creek, his pale eyes filled with a terrible knowledge as he whispers, "They ain't who they pretend to be." I don't know if what I encountered was a ghost, a demon, or something else entirely, something that has existed in those ancient hills since long before humans arrived to name them. I only know that it's still out there, still waiting. And sometimes I catch myself wondering what would have happened if I'd followed the girl into the darkness. Part of me, a small, treacherous part, still wants to know. That's what frightens me most of all. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Black Elk Wilderness area of South Dakota, during what was supposed to be a week-long backpacking trip with my closest friends. None of us were the same after what we encountered in those remote pines, and some of us didn't make it out at all. The four of us had been friends since college. Me, the de facto leader, always planning our adventures. Derek Fisher, my roommate from freshman year who'd become a high school science teacher. Allison Patel, brilliant and fearless, now working as an ER nurse, and Casey Novak, the cautious one who nevertheless always showed up despite his anxiety. We tried to do one major hiking trip each year, taking turns choosing the destination. This year was my pick, and I'd chosen the Black Hills. "This is going to be epic," I said as we unloaded our gear at the Willow Creek Horse Camp trailhead. 7 days of pristine wilderness, the Harney Peak Lookout, and maybe we'll even spot some elk. The late September air had a crisp bite to it, promising cooler temperatures than our sweltering homes in Chicago. Derek adjusted his pack, already scanning the tree line. "Just remember what the ranger said. There have been unusual bear sightings this year. We need to be extra careful with our food." Allison rolled her eyes. "We know the drill, Professor. This isn't our first rodeo." She playfully punched his arm while Casey nervously checked his bear spray for the 3rd time. "I read a story about a hiker who disappeared in these woods last summer," Casey said quietly. "They never found him." "That's because the Black Hills have over 1 million acres of wilderness," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "Easy to get lost if you don't know what you're doing, but we have maps, GPS, and years of experience. We'll be fine." Looking back now, I wish I had listened more closely to Casey's concerns. The uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach as we locked the car and headed up the trail wasn't just excitement, it was warning. The first 2 days were perfect. Challenging trails with stunning vistas of ponderosa pines stretching to the horizon, granite spires jutting dramatically from the forest floor, and nights filled with more stars than I'd ever seen. We made good progress, covering nearly 15 miles and setting up our second camp near Horsethief Lake as planned. That night, something shifted. The temperature dropped rapidly after sunset, far below the forecast. Even with my 4-season sleeping bag, I shivered uncontrollably. Around 2 a.m., I woke to Casey frantically shaking my shoulder. "Michael, listen," he whispered, his face pale in the moonlight streaming through our tent. At first, I heard nothing beyond the usual symphony of night sounds, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then it came, a low, mournful wail that seemed to start as human but stretched into something inhuman, echoing across the valley. "Probably just a coyote," I said, though it sounded like no coyote I'd ever heard. "That's not a coyote," Casey replied, his voice trembling. "It sounds like something in pain." We listened as the sound came again, closer this time. In the adjacent tent, I heard Allison and Derek stirring. "Should we check it out?" Derek called over. "Absolutely not," I responded. "Whatever it is, we stay put until morning." None of us slept much after that. When dawn finally broke, we emerged from our tents to find the campsite undisturbed, yet something felt off. The usual morning birdsong was absent, the forest unnaturally silent. "Did anyone else have weird dreams?" Allison asked as she boiled water for coffee. "I kept dreaming something was watching us from the trees." Derek nodded. "I dreamt I was lost, walking in circles, and every time I thought I found the trail, it disappeared." Casey said nothing, but his hands shook as he packed his sleeping bag. I tried to lighten the mood. "Let's get moving. We've got a big day ahead. Harney Peak is almost 7 miles from here, and I want to reach the summit before afternoon thunderstorms roll in." The 3rd day started normally enough. The trail to Harney Peak, officially renamed Black Elk Peak, though many locals still use the old name, wound through stands of aspen just beginning to turn golden. Under different circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. Around midday, our GPS started glitching. The screen would freeze, then jump to show us miles from our actual location. After the 3rd time it happened, I pulled out my paper map and compass. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, looking at the landmarks around us. According to the map, we should have been approaching the cathedral spires, but the terrain didn't match at all. Somehow, we had veered far off the marked trail without noticing. "Maybe we should turn back, try to find where we went wrong," Casey suggested, his earlier anxiety now fully justified. Derek shook his head. "The summit can't be far. We just need to head northeast and we'll hit the main trail again." I agreed with Derek, making a decision I would forever regret. Let's push on, but stay together. An hour later, the sky darkened prematurely. What had been a clear morning was now threatening an early storm. The temperature plummeted as thunder rumbled in the distance. We quickened our pace, hoping to reach some form of shelter before the downpour. That's when Allison stopped suddenly, pointing to something half hidden among the trees 20 yards off the trail. "Is that a cabin?" she asked. I squinted through the gloom. It was indeed a small, weathered cabin with a sagging roof and a stone chimney. It didn't look like an official Park Service structure. It was too old, too decrepit. But with the first heavy raindrops beginning to fall, we had little choice. "Hello," I called out as we approached. "Anyone here?" No answer came. The door hung partially open on rusted hinges, creaking softly in the rising wind. The cabin's interior was a single room, dusty and long abandoned. A crude stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a wooden table and 2 chairs sat in the center. In one corner was a narrow cot with what looked like an ancient wool blanket. The walls were adorned with yellowed newspaper clippings and what appeared to be animal skulls. "This place gives me the creeps," Allison said, but she dropped her pack with relief as the rain began pounding on the roof. Derek examined the newspaper clippings. "These are from the 1950s. Listen to this. Local man missing after reports of strange creature in woods." "Stop it," Casey snapped. "That's not helping." I busied myself checking the fireplace to see if it was safe to use. "The chimney looks clear. We should get a fire going. It's freezing in here." We gathered what dry wood we could find near the cabin and soon had a small blaze crackling in the fireplace. Outside, the storm intensified, lashing rain against the windows and sending occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the room in harsh, brief bursts. With nothing else to do, we unrolled our sleeping bags and prepared for an unexpected night indoors. As darkness fell completely, our conversation turned to the cabin itself. "Who do you think built this place?" Allison wondered, the firelight casting long shadows across her face. "Probably some old prospector," Derek replied. "The Black Hills had several gold rushes. Might have been a miner's shelter." "But why all these newspaper clippings about missing people?" Casey asked, his voice tight. I was about to respond when a deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, and our fire suddenly changed color, blazing a sickly green for several seconds before returning to normal. "What the hell was that?" Allison whispered. "Probably some mineral residue in the chimney," Derek offered, though he sounded unsure. That's when we heard it again, the same wailing cry from the previous night, barely audible over the storm but unmistakably closer. Casey jumped to his feet. "We need to leave, now." "And go where?" I asked. "It's pitch black and pouring rain. Whatever that is, we're safer in here than out there." We agreed to take watches through the night, with Derek volunteering for the first shift. I must have been more exhausted than I realized because, despite my unease, I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. My dreams were vivid and disturbing. I was running through endless woods, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel getting closer with each labored breath. The trees whispered as I passed, not in the gentle rustling of leaves but in actual words I almost understood. When I finally collapsed, unable to run further, thin, gnarled hands reached for me from the shadows. I woke with a start to find Allison shaking me. "Your watch," she whispered. The fire had died down to embers, casting the cabin in deep shadow. Derek and Casey were asleep in their bags. "Anything happen?" I asked groggily. Allison hesitated. I thought I saw something move past the window, but it was probably just branches in the wind. She slipped into her sleeping bag. "The storm's letting up, at least." She was right, the thunder had moved off, though rain still pattered softly on the roof. I added wood to the fire and settled in for my watch, checking my phone out of habit, though I knew there was no service. To my surprise, it powered on, showing 3:17 a.m. and a single bar of battery despite having been at 70% when I went to sleep. More disturbing was a photo in my gallery I didn't remember taking, a blurry image of trees in darkness with what looked like a tall, emaciated figure standing between two trunks. My hands shook as I deleted it, telling myself it must have been an accidental shot of the forest from earlier. The next few hours passed in tense silence. I found myself avoiding looking directly at the windows, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching from outside. When dawn finally came, gray and misty, I woke the others with immense relief. "The good news is the storm's passed," I announced. "We should be able to get back on trail and to the peak today." Casey was checking his pack when he suddenly cursed. "My food bag's empty." "What do you mean, empty?" Derek asked. "I mean everything's gone. Energy bars, trail mix, freeze-dried meals, all of it." We all checked our supplies. My food stash was untouched, as was Derek's, but Allison's had been picked through, with about half her provisions missing. "Did an animal get into the packs?" Allison suggested, though there was no sign of tearing or chewing. "I was awake all night," I said. "Nothing came into the cabin." Casey began pacing. "This isn't right. First the GPS, then we find this creepy cabin that shouldn't exist. Now this? Something's wrong here." "Calm down," Derek said. "There's a logical explanation. Maybe you miscounted your food, or maybe someone's playing a joke." He looked pointedly at me. I raised my hands. "Wasn't me. But look, we can share what we have. The main trail can't be far, and once we reach the peak, we're only a day's hike from the ranger station at Sylvan Lake." We packed quickly, eager to leave the cabin behind. As we stepped outside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Surrounding the cabin in a perfect circle were dozens of small stone cairns that definitely hadn't been there when we arrived. "Did one of you build these?" I asked, knowing the answer before anyone spoke. Slow head shakes all around. Wordlessly, we pushed through the cairns and back into the forest. The day that followed was a nightmare of confusion and mounting dread. The mist never lifted, limiting visibility to 20 or 30 yards at most. Despite my best efforts with map and compass, we couldn't find the main trail. Landmarks I thought I recognized led nowhere, and twice we found ourselves circling back to the same lightning-struck tree despite walking in what I was certain was a straight line. By mid-afternoon, tensions were running high. "You have no idea where we are, do you?" Derek accused, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "The fog is disorienting," I defended myself. "Once it clears—" "It's not clearing," Allison interrupted, "and it's getting colder." She was right. The temperature was dropping rapidly, our breath fogging in the air, though it was only late September. Even more concerning, the daylight was already fading, though it couldn't have been later than 4 p.m. "We need to make camp," I finally admitted. "It's not safe to keep wandering in the dark." We found a small clearing and mechanically went through the motions of setting up tents. No one suggested building a fire. Somehow, the thought of drawing attention to ourselves seemed dangerous. We divided the remaining food, a meager dinner of half an energy bar each. As darkness fell completely, the forest around us came alive with sounds. Not the normal nocturnal chorus, but whispers just at the edge of comprehension. The wailing cry came again, no longer distant, but seemingly from multiple directions at once. "It's surrounding us," Casey whispered, clutching his bear spray like a talisman. That's when Derek's behavior changed. He'd been staring into the darkness for several minutes when he suddenly smiled, a wide, unnatural grin I'd never seen on his face before. "You're all being ridiculous," he said, his voice oddly flat. "It's beautiful out there. I'm going to explore." Before anyone could react, he stood and walked toward the trees. "Derek, wait!" I called, scrambling after him. He turned, his face now hidden in shadow. "Don't worry, Michael. I just need to talk to it. It's been calling me." I lunged for him, but he was already moving with uncanny speed into the darkness. Within seconds, he had vanished into the mist. Allison, Casey, and I spent a frantic hour searching the immediate area, calling Derek's name until our voices grew hoarse. There was no trace of him, not even footprints in the soft forest floor beyond where we'd last seen him. "We need to stay together," Allison insisted when we finally returned to camp. "No matter what we hear, no matter what we think we see." We crammed into one two-person tent, huddled together for warmth and comfort. None of us spoke of the possibility that Derek might return, or what might be wearing his face if he did. I'm not sure any of us slept that night. The whispers in the forest grew louder, occasionally forming words in a language that hurt my ears. Twice we heard Derek's voice calling for help, but it came from different directions each time, and Allison's iron grip on my arm kept me from investigating. Dawn brought little relief. The mist remained, thicker than ever, and with it came a smell, a putrid, rotting odor that clung to our clothes and turned our stomachs. "We need to try to find the ranger station," I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "We stick to a straight line heading south, no matter what." Casey shook his head. "We need to find Derek first." "Derek is gone," Allison said flatly. "Whatever took him, it'll take us too if we don't get out of here." The argument might have continued, but a sound stopped us cold, the crack of a branch breaking nearby, followed by footsteps approaching our camp. From the mist emerged a figure. For one hopeful moment, I thought it was Derek. But as it came closer, we saw it was a stranger. An old man with a weathered face and a patchy gray beard, dressed in surprisingly clean park ranger attire. "You folks seem lost," he said, his voice friendly but his eyes cold. "I'm Ranger Sullivan. There's a storm coming. Why don't you follow me to the station?" Relief flooded through me, but Casey grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Michael," he hissed, "look at his badge." I focused on the badge pinned to the man's shirt. It was tarnished and bent, and the name clearly read Ranger Morris, not Sullivan. The ranger, or whoever he was, noticed our hesitation. His smile widened just a fraction too much. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "I'm just trying to help." "Our friend," Allison said carefully. "He went missing last night. Have you seen him? Tall guy, dark hair, blue jacket?" Something flickered across the man's face. Hunger? Amusement? "No, ma'am. But if he's out there, we'll find him. Now please, follow me." My instincts screamed danger. This man wasn't right, the badge wasn't right, none of this was right. I made a split-second decision. "Thank you, Ranger," I said. "Just give us a minute to pack up." The man nodded and stepped back a few paces, watching us with that too-wide smile. I knelt, pretending to roll my sleeping bag while whispering urgently to Allison and Casey. "On my signal, run east. Don't look back, don't stop no matter what you hear." They nodded, almost imperceptibly. I stood, shouldering my pack, and took a step toward the false ranger. "Now!" I shouted, hurling my metal water bottle directly at the man's face. It connected with the sickening thud, and the man, the thing, let out a howl that was definitely not human. As it staggered backward, its features seemed to ripple and shift like melting wax. We ran. Crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, we fled eastward as I'd instructed. The creature's howls pursued us, joined by others from different directions. Whatever it wasn't alone. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to stretch and contract. The mist swirled around us, sometimes revealing glimpses of the forest, sometimes thickening until I could barely see Allison and Casey running ahead of me. A root caught my foot, sending me sprawling. Pain lanced through my ankle as I tried to stand. Allison turned back, her eyes wide with fear. "Go!" I shouted. "I'll catch up." She hesitated. Then Casey grabbed her arm, pulling her onward. They disappeared into the mist as I struggled to my feet. My ankle held my weight, though barely. A sprain, not a break. I limped forward, trying to follow their path, when a familiar voice called my name from behind. "Michael, help me." Derek stood 20 yards away, his clothes torn, his face scratched and bleeding. "Oh God, Derek," I breathed. He took a step forward, wincing. I got away, but I'm hurt. Help me." Something wasn't right. Despite the tears in his clothing, there was no blood except on his face, and those scratches looked deliberate, too neat. And his eyes. They didn't look like Derek's eyes. "Where have you been?" I asked, slowly reaching for my knife. "Looking for you," he replied, taking another step closer. "I found a way out, but we have to hurry." "What's my sister's name?" I asked suddenly. Derek had been at my sister's wedding just 2 months ago. He didn't even hesitate. "Sarah, of course. Michael, we don't have time for this." "My sister's name is Rebecca." I turned and ran, ignoring the pain shooting up my leg. Behind me, Derek's voice distorted into that terrible wail, followed by the sound of something large crashing through the forest in pursuit. I ran until my lungs burned and spots danced before my eyes. The mist suddenly cleared, and I found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. Looking down, I could see a stream about 30 feet below. Not certain death, but a dangerous drop. The crashing behind me grew louder. I was trapped. A hand grabbed my shoulder and I nearly screamed before recognizing Casey's face. "This way," he hissed, pulling me along the edge of the ravine to where a fallen tree created a precarious bridge across the gap. On the other side, Allison waved frantically. Casey went first, moving with surprising agility across the log. I followed, trying not to look down, my injured ankle throbbing with each step. We had just reached the other side when Derek emerged from the forest. But it wasn't pretending to be Derek anymore. The thing that stood at the ravine's edge was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly gray-white stretched too tight over elongated limbs. Its face retained just enough of Derek's features to be recognizable, twisted into a grotesque parody of my friend. "Leave us alone," Allison screamed at it. "What do you want?" The creature tilted its head, regarding us with milky white eyes. When it spoke, the voice was a horrifying blend of Derek's and something ancient and hungry. "To wear you," it said, "to be you." Then it began crossing the log. Casey looked around desperately, then spotted a loose boulder at the edge of the ravine. "Help me," he shouted, throwing his weight against it. Allison and I joined him, pushing with all our strength. The creature was halfway across when the boulder finally gave way, tumbling down and striking the log with enough force to snap it. The makeshift bridge collapsed, and the thing that had been wearing Derek's face plummeted into the ravine with an unholy shriek. We didn't wait to see if it survived the fall. Supporting each other, we continued eastward, driven by pure survival instinct. Hours later, as the real dusk approached, we stumbled onto an actual trail marked with official Forest Service blazes. Following it, we eventually reached a road where, miraculously, a park ranger vehicle was parked. The genuine ranger inside was shocked by our appearance, filthy, bloodied, and babbling about creatures in the mist. Search and rescue teams went looking for Derek, of course. They found no trace of him, nor of the cabin we described. The GPS data from our phones showed we had indeed veered miles off any marked trail, into an area of the Black Elk Wilderness rarely visited even by experienced rangers. The official report listed Derek as missing, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. Only the three of us know what really happened in those woods. It's been 2 years since we escaped the Black Hills. Casey rarely leaves his apartment now. Allison moved to Arizona, as far from forests as she could get. And me? I still wake up in the night hearing that wail, still check my phone for photos I don't remember taking. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I think I hear Derek's voice calling my name. And sometimes, in crowded places, I see people moving with an odd, jerky gait, their smiles a little too wide, their eyes a little too vacant. I've researched the legends since then. The Dakota spoke of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, cursing them with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The more I read, the more convinced I become that's what we encountered, or something like it. A creature that doesn't just kill its victims, but becomes them, wearing their faces to lure others. I haven't been hiking since. I don't think I ever will again. Because the worst part isn't the memories or the nightmares. It's the hunger I feel sometimes when I look at strangers, a hunger that wasn't there before the Black Hills. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Black Hills of South Dakota, near a place the locals call Elk Creek Hollow. I'd been an avid hiker for most of my adult life, but nothing in my previous experiences could have prepared me for what awaited me in those woods. I'd recently gone through a difficult divorce. My ex-wife, Meredith, had taken almost everything: our house in Minneapolis, most of our savings, even custody of our golden retriever, Max. The only things I had left were my hiking gear, my Subaru Outback, and a desperate need to escape civilization for a while, so when an old college buddy, Derek Walsh, called to suggest a weekend camping trip in the Black Hills, I jumped at the opportunity. "It'll be just what you need," Derek had said. "Fresh air, no cell service, no lawyers, just you, me, and the great outdoors." Derek was one of those guys who seemed to coast through life on charm and luck. He'd never married, never settled down, and had somehow parlayed his business degree into a remote consulting job that allowed him to travel whenever he wanted. I'd always envied his freedom, especially during the last bitter months of my marriage. We agreed to meet in Rapid City on a Friday in early October. The plan was to drive to a trailhead near Elk Creek, hike about 8 miles to a campsite Derek knew about, spend 2 nights there, and then head back on Sunday. Simple enough. The drive from Minneapolis took me nearly 9 hours, but I didn't mind. The solitude of the open road was exactly what I needed. I arrived in Rapid City around 3 p.m. and met Derek at a small diner just off the interstate. "Thomas!" he exclaimed, wrapping me in a bear hug. "Man, it's been too long." Derek looked exactly the same as I remembered: athletic build, perpetual tan, and that easy, confident smile. We ordered coffee and caught up while we waited for our food. "So how are you holding up?" he asked, his voice softening. "Meredith really put you through the ringer, huh?" "I'm managing," I said, stirring my coffee absently. "Just need to clear my head, you know? Start fresh." Derek nodded sympathetically. "Well, you picked the perfect place for it. These hills have a way of recalibrating your perspective." There was something in the way he said it that struck me as odd, but I dismissed it. Derek had always had a flair for the dramatic. After lunch, we drove my Subaru to the trailhead, about an hour outside of Rapid City. It was a small gravel parking area at the end of a narrow dirt road, with a weathered sign marking the start of the Elk Creek Trail. As we unloaded our gear, I noticed we were the only car in the lot. "Not exactly a popular spot, huh?" I commented. Derek shrugged. "That's the appeal. No crowds, no tourists taking selfies every 5 minutes." We shouldered our packs and set off down the trail. The first few miles were pleasant enough. A well-maintained path winding through pine forests and across small streams. The autumn colors were just beginning to emerge, splashes of gold and crimson among the evergreens. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. As we hiked, Derek filled me in on his latest adventures: a month in Thailand, a consulting gig in Dubai, a brief romance with a flight attendant from Madrid. His stories seemed to grow more outlandish with each mile, but I was happy for the distraction. Around mile 6, the trail began to change. It narrowed considerably, becoming more overgrown and less defined. The trees seemed to crowd in closer, blocking out most of the late afternoon sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably. "Are you sure this is still the trail?" I asked, pushing aside a branch that hung across our path. "Positive," Derek replied without hesitation. "It's just less traveled from here on out. Trust me, it's worth it." We continued for another mile or so in silence, the only sounds our footsteps and the occasional call of a distant bird. The deeper we went, the more I felt an inexplicable unease settling over me. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint exactly, just a vague sense that something wasn't right. "Derek," I said finally, "how did you find this place again?" He didn't answer immediately. focused on navigating a particularly steep section of the trail. "A guy I met in Denver told me about it," he said eventually. "Said it was one of the most beautiful camping spots in the Black Hills, if you're willing to work for it." I was about to ask more when we emerged from a dense thicket into a small clearing. In the center was a fire pit ringed with stones, and around the edges were several flat areas perfect for setting up tents. "Home sweet home," Derek announced, dropping his pack with a satisfied sigh. I had to admit, it was a good spot. The clearing was nestled in a small valley with a trickling stream just beyond the trees to the east. The surrounding forest provided shelter from the wind, and the canopy above was thin enough to promise a view of the stars later. We set up our tents on opposite sides of the clearing and gathered wood for a fire. As the daylight faded, Derek got the fire going while I filtered water from the stream. By the time darkness fell completely, we had a cheerful blaze going and were heating up freeze-dried meals over our camp stoves. "To new beginnings," Derek said, raising his titanium mug of instant coffee. I clinked my mug against his, forcing a smile. "To new beginnings," I echoed. We stayed up for a few hours, reminiscing about college days and sharing stories. Derek avoided mentioning Meredith again, which I appreciated. Around 11, I decided to turn in, exhausted from the long drive and the hike. "I'll probably be up for a while," Derek said. "Never could sleep well the first night outdoors." I nodded and retreated to my tent, zipping myself into my sleeping bag. Despite my fatigue, sleep didn't come easily. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no owls hooting, none of the ambient sounds you'd expect. Just the occasional crack of the fire and Derek's movements around the camp. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were troubled. I dreamt I was lost in an endless forest, running from something I couldn't see but could feel breathing down my neck. In the dream, I called out for Derek, but my voice made no sound. I woke with a start, disoriented and damp with sweat despite the cool night air. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint red glow across the clearing. Derek's tent was zipped up, and I assumed he had finally gone to sleep. But then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. I held my breath, listening. "Thomas." It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like the forest itself was speaking my name. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Derek," I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "That you?" No response, just the soft hiss of dying embers. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. Derek's tent was still, no sign of movement. I was about to call out again when something caught my eye at the edge of the clearing, a flicker of movement just beyond the reach of my light. "Hello?" I called, my voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" The forest remained silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I zipped up my tent and tried to convince myself it was just nerves, just the lingering effects of my nightmare. Eventually, I fell into a fitful sleep. Morning came with a blanket of fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I emerged from my tent to find Derek already up, boiling water for coffee. "Morning, sunshine," he said cheerfully. "Sleep well?" I hesitated, unsure whether to mention the whisper from the night before. "Not really," I admitted. "Weird dreams." Derek nodded as if this was to be expected. "The air's different out here. Affects your sleep patterns." He handed me a steaming mug. "Coffee will help." As we sipped our coffee and ate breakfast bars, I studied Derek's face for any sign that he might have been messing with me during the night, but he seemed completely normal, perhaps even more relaxed than the day before. "So," he said, consulting a small topo map he'd pulled from his pack, "I thought we'd day hike up to Devil's Backbone today. It's a ridgeline about 3 miles from here, supposed to have incredible views." "Devil's Backbone," I repeated, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. Derek grinned. "Just a name. The locals are big on dramatic names for landmarks around here, probably because of all the ghost stories." Ghost stories? Derek waved a dismissive hand. Every small town in America has them. Apparently, this area has quite a few. Lost hikers, vengeful spirits, the usual campfire fare. He folded up the map. Nothing to worry about unless you're superstitious. I wasn't superstitious, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me since the previous night. Still, I'd come out here to clear my head, not to sit around camp all day dwelling on strange dreams and imagined whispers. "Lead the way," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. We packed day packs with water, snacks, and emergency supplies, and set off into the fog. The trail to Devil's Backbone was even less defined than the one we'd followed the day before, little more than a game path in places. The fog muffled our footsteps and clung to our clothes, a damp, cold embrace that seemed to seep into my bones. As we hiked, I tried to engage Derek in conversation, but he'd become uncharacteristically quiet, focused intently on the path ahead. After an hour of steady climbing, the fog began to thin, and I caught glimpses of rugged terrain through the trees, steep drop-offs, jagged rocks, stunted pines clinging to precarious ledges. "We're almost there," Derek said, his voice oddly flat. "Just beyond that ridge." We emerged from the tree line onto the ridge that must have been Devil's Backbone. It was a narrow spine of rock extending out over a deep valley, with sheer drops on either side. The fog still obscured much of the view, but what I could see was breathtaking. Layered hills fading into the distance, the tops of pine forests peeking through the mist like islands in a gray sea. Derek walked to the edge, peering down into the abyss below. I stayed back, never having been comfortable with heights. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said without turning around. "Like the edge of the world." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Derek," I said carefully, "are you okay?" He turned to face me then, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something shift behind his eyes, something dark and unfamiliar. But then he smiled, and he was just Derek again. "Never better," he said, just taking it all in. We spent about an hour on the ridge, eating trail mix and taking photos with my phone. Derek pointed out various landmarks, a distant peak that might have been Harney Peak, a valley that he claimed led all the way to Rapid City if you followed it long enough. As we prepared to head back to camp, the fog began to thicken again, rolling in from the valley below like a living thing, tendrils reaching up to reclaim the ridge. "We should get going," I said, suddenly anxious to be back in the relative safety of our clearing. Derek nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, he took a step closer to me, his eyes locking with mine. "Thomas," he said, his voice low, "do you ever think about how easy it would be to just disappear out here?" A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the damp air. "What do you mean?" He gestured to the fog-shrouded abyss. "People go missing in these hills all the time. Hikers, campers, hunters. Some are found, most aren't. They just vanish." I took an involuntary step back. "That's a weird thing to say, Derek." He laughed then, a sound that seemed forced. "Sorry, man, just thinking out loud. This place gets to you, you know? Makes you contemplate things." I forced a smile, but the unease that had been building since the previous night was now a full-blown alarm bell in my head. "Let's head back," I suggested again, more firmly this time. Derek held my gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then nodded. "Sure, let's go." The return journey was tense and silent. The fog had descended completely now, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. I kept Derek in sight at all times, not wanting to lose him in the murk, but also unwilling to turn my back on him for too long. It took us nearly 2 hours to find our way back to camp, almost double the time it had taken us to reach the ridge. By the time the clearing came into view, the fog had begun to dissipate, revealing a late afternoon sky heavy with dark clouds. "Looks like rain," Derek observed, glancing up. "Better secure our gear." We spent the next hour reinforcing our tent stakes, stringing up tarps and gathering additional firewood before the rain arrived. The physical labor helped ease the tension between us, and by the time we had a fire going again, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the strangeness on the ridge. The rain started just as we finished dinner, a light drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that hissed against our tarps and turned the ground around the fire pit to mud. We retreated to the shelter of the larger tarp we'd strung between two trees, sitting on logs we'd dragged over earlier. "Perfect camping weather," Derek joked, pulling a flask from his pocket. He offered it to me. "Bourbon." I hesitated, then accepted. The liquor burned going down, but spread a welcome warmth through my chest. "So," Derek said after taking a swig himself, "I've been thinking about what you said back in Rapid City, about starting fresh." "Yeah?" I passed the flask back to him. "Yeah, I think you're right to get away for a while. Clear your head, but maybe a weekend isn't enough." He took another drink, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Maybe you need something more. Permanent." The way he emphasized the word permanent sent a chill through me despite the bourbon's warmth. "What are you suggesting?" Derek shrugged, but there was nothing casual about the gesture. "Just that sometimes, to really start over, you need to leave everything behind. Become someone new." "I'm not sure I follow," I said, though a growing part of me feared that I did. Derek leaned forward, his face half in shadow. "What if you didn't go back, Thomas? What if you just stayed?" "Stayed where? Here?" I forced a laugh. "I have a life to get back to, Derek." "Do you?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. "A job you hate, an empty apartment, bills you can barely pay because of the divorce. What kind of life is that?" I stared at him, shocked by the sudden turn in conversation. "How do you know about my financial situation?" Derek waved the question away. "You mentioned it earlier." "No, I didn't." A tense silence fell between us, broken only by the patter of rain and the occasional crack of the fire. Derek's expression was unreadable in the flickering light. "I should turn in," I said finally, standing up. "It's been a long day." Derek didn't respond. Just watched me with that same inscrutable expression as I made my way to my tent. I zipped myself in, fully clothed, my mind racing. Something was very wrong here. Derek wasn't acting like himself, or maybe he was, and I just hadn't noticed until now, until we were isolated in the wilderness with no one else around. Despite my exhaustion, I lay awake for hours, listening to the rain and the occasional sound of Derek moving around the camp. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because I woke suddenly to complete silence. The rain had stopped. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. Something had woken me. I lay still, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, rhythmic sound from outside my tent. Footsteps moving slowly around the perimeter. "Derek," I called, my voice hoarse with sleep and fear. The footsteps paused, then continued, closer now. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, casting a beam through the thin fabric of my tent. A shadow moved across the wall. A human silhouette, unnaturally tall and thin. "Derek, is that you?" I called again, louder this time. The shadow stopped directly outside my tent. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a hand pressed against the fabric. A hand with fingers too long, joints too angular to be human. I scrambled backward, pressing against the far side of my tent as the hand began to slide downward toward the zipper. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The zipper began to move. In a panic, I kicked out, my foot connecting with the tent wall where the hand was. There was a sound. Not a cry of pain or surprise, but a low, rattling hiss. The hand withdrew. I lunged for my tent opening, fumbling with the zipper from the inside. I had to get out, had to find Derek, had to get away from whatever was outside. Finally, the zipper gave and I burst out into the clearing, headlamp beam dancing wildly as I looked around. The clearing was empty. No sign of Derek, no sign of whatever had been outside my tent. His tent stood untouched on the other side of the now dead fire, its entrance zipped closed. "Derek!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Derek! Wake up!" I approached his tent cautiously, calling his name repeatedly. When there was no response, I reluctantly unzipped the entrance and shone my light inside. Empty. The sleeping bag was still rolled up, unused. Derek's pack was gone. A cold dread settled over me. I was alone in the clearing. Or not alone, but abandoned. Derek had left me. I stumbled back to the fire pit, my mind reeling. Why would Derek leave in the middle of the night? And if it wasn't Derek outside my tent, then who or what was it? As I stood there trying to make sense of it all, a sound reached me from the darkness beyond the clearing. A voice calling my name. Thomas. Thomas. It was Derek's voice, but distorted somehow, as if he were speaking underwater or through a long tunnel. "Derek," I called back, my voice breaking. "Where are you?" "Here, Thomas. I'm here." The voice seemed to be coming from the direction of the stream. Without thinking, I moved toward it, my headlamp casting a feeble beam through the trees. "Hurry, Thomas. I need your help." I pushed through the underbrush, branches scraping my face and arms. The voice grew louder, more urgent. When I reached the stream, I stopped, sweeping my light across the water. There, on the opposite bank, stood Derek. But something was wrong. He stood too still, his posture too rigid, and his eyes, even from a distance I could see they reflected my light like an animal's, glowing an eerie yellow. "Derek?" I whispered, taking an involuntary step back. A smile spread across his face, a smile too wide, stretching his features in a way that seemed to defy the constraints of human anatomy. "Join me, Thomas," he said, his voice still having that strange underwater quality. "The water feels wonderful." I looked down at the stream between us. It was shallow, no more than ankle deep, its surface glittering in my headlamp beam. But something about it filled me with dread, a wrongness I couldn't articulate. "Where did you go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why did you leave camp?" Derek's smile widened impossibly further. "I've always been here, Thomas, just like the others." "Others?" I echoed, my mouth dry. Derek extended a hand toward me, the movement jerky like a marionette pulled by strings. "Cross the water, Thomas. I want to show you something amazing." Everything in me screamed to run, to flee back to camp, to grab my essentials and get as far away from this place as possible. But a horrified fascination kept me rooted to the spot. This was Derek, my friend for over a decade, and yet it wasn't. It couldn't be. "What are you?" I managed to ask. Derek's head tilted at an unnatural angle, almost 90 degrees to his shoulder. "I'm your friend, Thomas. I've always been your friend. And now I want to be more." A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my light catching a figure retreating into the trees, a figure that looked exactly like Derek, dressed in the same clothes but moving with a fluid grace that the thing across the stream lacked. "Don't listen to it," this new Derek called over his shoulder. "Run!" I stood frozen. I stood, caught between two impossible versions of my friend. The Derek across the stream let out a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, a high, keening wail that made my ears ring and my vision blur. "Too late," it said, its voice suddenly clear and cold. "The Hollow has you now." It stepped into the stream, and the water changed. It darkened, thickened, began to flow upstream toward me. The smell hit me then, a rotting, putrid stench that made me gag. I finally broke from my paralysis and ran, chasing after the other Derek, the one who had warned me. Behind me, I could hear splashing as the thing pursued. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like grasping hands, roots rising to trip my feet. My headlamp beam bounced wildly, illuminating fragments of the nightmare landscape. Here, a twisted tree that seemed to have a face. There a glimpse of something large moving parallel to my path. I caught sight of Derek ahead, his form flickering between trees. "Wait!" I gasped, lungs burning. "Derek, wait!" He glanced back but didn't slow. I pushed myself harder, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind me. Suddenly, the trees opened up, and I found myself back in our clearing. Derek was already there, frantically shoving items into his pack. "What's happening?" I demanded, bending over to catch my breath. "What was that thing?" "No time," Derek snapped, his movements jerky with panic. "Pack what you can. We have to go now." "Not until you tell me what's going on." I grabbed his arm, forcing him to face me. Derek's eyes were wide with fear, his face pale in the dim light of my headlamp. "It's the Hollow," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's what happens to people who stay too long." "The Hollow? What are you talking about?" A crashing sound came from the direction of the stream, closer now. Derek pulled free of my grip and resumed his frantic packing. "There's no trail," he said, words tumbling out in a rush. "The guy who told me about this place in Denver, he wasn't a hiker. He was something else, something that wanted me to bring others here." My blood ran cold. "You led me into a trap." Derek's face crumpled. "I didn't know, Thomas. I swear I didn't know until last night, when it came to me in my dreams, showed me what it wanted." "And what does it want?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "New vessels," Derek whispered. "New forms to take. The Hollow is empty, always hungry." The crashing grew louder, followed by that same high, keening wail from before. "Move!" Derek shouted, grabbing his pack and my arm. "Leave everything else." We ran, abandoning our tents, our sleeping bags, everything but the packs on our backs. Derek led the way, following a different path than the one we'd taken in. Steeper, more treacherous, but hopefully faster. The thing that looked like Derek pursued us, its wailing call echoing through the trees. And it wasn't alone. As we ran, I caught glimpses of other figures moving through the forest. Some human in shape, others not. All converging on our position. We ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled with each step. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn when Derek suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. We stood still, listening. The forest was quiet. No wailing, no crashing pursuit. "Did we lose them?" I whispered. Derek shook his head slowly. "They don't need to chase us anymore," he said, his voice hollow. "Look." He pointed ahead to where the trail should have continued down the mountain. Instead, there was nothing, just the same stretch of forest we had just come through, the same distinctive boulder, the same fallen log, the same pattern of trees. "That's not possible," I breathed, turning in a circle. Every direction looked the same section of forest repeating like a glitch in a video game. "The Hollow doesn't follow the rules of our world," Derek said. "It bends space, folds it back on itself. We're trapped in a loop." A sound behind us made us both whirl around. The Derek thing stood there, its smile wider than ever, its eyes now completely black. "You can't leave," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "No one leaves the Hollow." I reached for Derek's arm, ready to run again, but he was no longer beside me. I turned to find him standing several feet away, a strange expression on his face. "Derek," I called uncertainly. He looked at me and I saw something shift behind his eyes, the same darkness I'd glimpsed on Devil's Backbone. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he said softly. "It promised me a way out if I brought you here. It promised me freedom." My heart shattered. "You're working with it. You led me here to... What? Feed me to this thing?" Derek's face twisted with anguish. "You don't understand what it's like being trapped here. 3 years, Thomas. I've been trying to find a way out for 3 years." "3 years?" I echoed, disbelieving. "But I just saw you in Rapid City yesterday." Derek smiled sadly. Time works differently in the Hollow. For me, it's been 3 years since I met that thing in Denver. For you, it's been a day. The Derek thing moved closer, its movements smoother now, more natural. Tell him the rest, Derek, it urged, its voice almost gentle. Tell him what happens to those who stay too long. Derek's eyes filled with tears. You become part of it, he whispered. Part of the Hollow. Your memories, your form, all of it absorbed and used to lure new victims. Understanding dawned, cold and terrible. You're not Derek, I said, backing away from both of them. The real Derek is already gone, isn't he? The Derek thing laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Very good, Thomas. Very perceptive. The thing that had been pretending to be my friend, the one I'd been following, the one I'd trusted, shifted, its features melting like wax, reforming into something only vaguely human. Where Derek had stood was now a gaunt, pallid creature with 2 long limbs and a face that seemed unfinished, like a sculpture abandoned halfway through. What are you? I asked, my voice barely audible. We are the Hollow, both creatures said in unison. We are the hunger that never ends. They began to move toward me, their movements synchronized, graceful in their otherworldliness. I backed up until I felt a tree behind me, its bark rough against my palms. Stay back, I warned, fumbling in my pocket for my knife. A small folding blade, useless against whatever these things were, but the only weapon I had. They laughed again, that same broken glass sound. You cannot hurt us, Thomas. We are not flesh as you understand it. As they drew closer, the forest around me began to change. The trees seemed to bend inward, their branches reaching down like grasping hands. The ground beneath my feet softened, became almost liquid, threatening to pull me down. In that moment of absolute terror, a memory surfaced, something I'd read years ago in a book about folklore, about creatures that lured travelers astray, that fed on fear and despair. Such things, the book had said, were bound by rules, by limitations. You need my consent, I said suddenly, the words emerging from some deep, instinctual part of me. You can't take me unless I agree. The creatures paused, their black eyes fixing on me with new intensity. That's it, isn't it? I continued, gaining confidence. That's why you tried to trick me, why you made me think Derek was still alive. You need me to give in willingly. They remained silent, but their stillness was confirmation enough. I don't consent, I said firmly, standing straighter despite the ground's attempt to swallow me. I refuse to be part of whatever you are. The Derek thing tilted its head, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite knowing it wasn't really my friend. You will change your mind, it said. They always do, in the end. Hunger, thirst, loneliness, these are powerful motivators. We'll see, I replied with more bravado than I felt. The creatures exchanged a look, then retreated into the trees, moving with that same unsettling grace. Enjoy your solitude, Thomas, the Derek thing called back. We will be watching. We will be waiting. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the infinite loop of forest. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Hours, days, maybe weeks. The sun would rise and set, but I suspected even that was an illusion created by the Hollow. I rationed the food in my pack, drank from streams that always tasted slightly wrong, tried to find a path that would lead me out of the loop. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of the creatures watching me from between the trees. Sometimes I would hear Derek's voice calling my name, pleading for help. I learned to ignore these lures, to focus on my determination to find a way out. I tried to keep track of time, to maintain my grip on reality, but it became increasingly difficult. The Hollow seemed to respond to my thoughts, reshaping itself to confuse and disorient me. When I thought I'd found a landmark to navigate by, it would shift or disappear entirely. The hunger was the worst part. When my supplies ran out, I tried to forage, but the hollow provided little nourishment. Tasteless berries that never quite satisfied. Small animals that were too easy to catch and tasted like ash. I began to hallucinate, or at least I thought they were hallucinations. Meredith would appear, telling me she was sorry that she wanted me back. My parents, long dead, would walk beside me for a time before dissolving into mist. Derek, the real Derek, not the hollow mockery, would sit with me by fires I built, reminiscing about our college days. Through it all, the creatures watched and waited, occasionally offering me release if only I would give in, become one of them. Each time I refused, though it became harder to remember why. And then, one day, or night, it was hard to tell anymore, I found the stream again. The same stream that had run near our original campsite, though I'd crossed countless streams in my wanderings. Something about this one was familiar. A particular bend, a distinctive rock formation on the bank. I knelt beside it, cupping my hands to drink, when a reflection caught my eye. Not my own, but Derek's. I jerked back, expecting to see the Derek thing standing behind me, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the water. The reflection remained, looking up at me from beneath the surface. But it wasn't the hollow mockery with its too wide smile and black eyes. This was Derek as I remembered him from our college days. Younger, carefree, his eyes clear and human. "Thomas," he said, his voice bubbling up through the water. "You found it." "Found what?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "The way out, the hollow's weakness." I stared at him, hardly daring to hope. How do I know this isn't another trick? The reflection smiled sadly. "You don't, but ask yourself, what have you got to lose?" He was right. I was slowly starving, slowly losing my mind. If this was a trick, at least it would be an end to my wandering. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "The stream is the key," Derek's reflection said. "The hollow cannot cross running water in its true form. That's why it needs vessels like me, like the version of me that brought you here. If you follow this stream to its source, you'll find the boundary of the hollow's power." It sounded too simple, too convenient, but as I said, I had nothing to lose. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, suspicious. "If you're part of the hollow—" "I am," the reflection admitted, "but not by choice. Some part of us remains, even after absorption. Some small piece of humanity that the hollow can't fully digest." I hesitated, searching the watery face for any sign of deception. "And this source, how far?" "Not far, as distance works here. Follow the water upstream against its flow. That's important. Don't let it trick you into going downstream." "And when I find the source?" "Cross it and don't look back. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, don't look back until you reach civilization." It sounded like something from a fairy tale, but I had no better options. "Thank you," I said, uncertain if gratitude was appropriate for a fragment of my dead friend trapped in some eldritch nightmare. The reflection began to fade. "Hurry, Thomas. They know I'm helping you. They're coming." As if on cue, that high, keening wail echoed through the forest. The Derek thing and its companion were hunting me again. I immediately began following the stream upward, fighting against the current that seemed to push harder with each step. The water, once ankle-deep, now reached my knees, then my waist. Still, I pressed on. The forest changed as I moved upstream. The trees grew more twisted, more alien. Eyes seemed to peer from knotholes, and more than once I caught glimpses of impossible geometries between the trunks. Spaces that shouldn't exist, angles that defied Euclidean understanding. The wailing grew closer. I moved faster, fighting against water now chest-deep. My legs burned with the effort, my lungs struggled for breath in the increasingly thick air. And then I saw it. A small waterfall cascading down a rock face about 50 yards ahead. The source. Behind me, the creatures burst from the tree line, their forms shifting constantly. Derek's features melting into something insectile, then reptilian, then unrecognizably alien. "You cannot leave," they shrieked in unison. "You are ours." I lunged forward, swimming now against the powerful current. The creatures entered the water behind me, but they moved sluggishly as if the stream itself resisted them. 20 yards from the waterfall, something grabbed my ankle. A hand, cold and strong. I kicked out frantically, connecting with something solid. The grip loosened, and I swam on. 10 yards. The creatures were closing in, their wails now a physical force that pressed against my ears until I thought my head would explode. 5 yards. A face surged up from the water before me. Derek's face, but wrong, the features sliding across his skull like wax under a flame. "Thomas," it gurgled, "don't leave me here. Take me with you." I hesitated for just a moment. A nearly fatal mistake. Hands gripped my shoulders, pulling me under. Water filled my mouth, my nose. I thrashed wildly, fighting to break free. My hand struck rock, the base of the waterfall. With one desperate surge, I pulled myself forward, breaking the creature's grip. I erupted from the pool beneath the falls, gasping for air. Before me was a narrow gap in the rock face, just wide enough for a person to slip through. Beyond it, I could see daylight. Real daylight, not the diffuse, sourceless illumination of the hollow. "Thomas!" The scream behind me was deafening. Full of rage and hunger and loss. "Don't look back." That's what the reflection had said. No matter what, don't look back. I squeezed through the gap, scraping my shoulders and back against the rough stone. The wailing rose to an unbearable pitch, then abruptly cut off as I emerged on the other side. I found myself on a rocky slope overlooking a valley I didn't recognize. The sun, the real sun, was setting, painting the landscape in reds and golds. Far below, I could see a road winding through the trees, and along it, the distant glint of a car's windshield. Civilization, safety. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that gap in the rocks. But exhaustion overcame me. I collapsed on the slope, consciousness fading as the last light of day slipped below the horizon. I awoke to the sound of voices and the beam of a flashlight in my face. "Sir, can you hear me? Can you hear? We're with search and rescue." I blinked against the light, making out the forms of 2 people in uniform kneeling beside me. A man and a woman, their faces lined with concern. "How?" I croaked, my throat raw. "How did you find me?" The woman, her name tag read Martinez, helped me sit up. "A hiker reported seeing someone collapse on this slope yesterday evening. We've been searching since dawn." "Yesterday evening? What day is it?" I asked. "Tuesday," the man replied. "October 12th. 3 days. I'd been in the hollow for 3 days, though it had felt like weeks. They helped me down the slope to a waiting ATV, asking questions I couldn't answer truthfully. I mumbled something about getting separated from my hiking partner, about being lost and confused. "We'll need to file a missing persons report for your friend," Martinez said as they loaded me into an ambulance at the trailhead. "No," I said quickly. "No, he's gone. He's been gone for a long time." They exchanged a look but didn't press the issue. I spent 2 days in the hospital being treated for dehydration, exposure, and what the doctors diplomatically referred to as acute stress reaction. No one believed my story about the hollow, of course. They nodded politely and increased my sedation. When I was released, I discovered my car had been found at the Elk Creek trailhead, keys still in the ignition. A miracle it hadn't been stolen, the police said. A miracle I'd survived. I drove back to Minneapolis in a daze, jumping at shadows, flinching whenever I passed a wooded area. I sold my apartment, quit my job, moved to Chicago where the buildings were tall and the forest distant. But the hollow isn't done with me. Sometimes in dreams, I hear that keening wail. Sometimes, catching my reflection in a store window or a puddle after rain, I see a face looking back that isn't quite mine. a face with a smile that stretches too wide, with eyes a little too dark. And sometimes when my phone rings late at night and the caller ID shows Derek Walsh, I answer despite knowing better. I listen to the sound of rushing water and a voice that bubbles up from impossible depths. "I'm still waiting, Thomas," it says. "We're all still waiting, and one day you'll come back to us." I know it's right. The hollow has marked me, claimed me. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. I'll find myself drawn back to those hills, back to that stream, back to the clearing where it all began. Because the truth is, part of me never left, and the part that remains is hungry. So, if you're planning a hiking trip to the Black Hills, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow strangers who promise beautiful, secluded campsites. And if you happen to be near Elk Creek and hear someone calling your name from the forest, someone who sounds like a friend you haven't seen in years, run. Don't look back, and pray the hollow hasn't already set its sights on you. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Black Hills of South Dakota just 3 months ago, though it feels like another lifetime. The promotion was supposed to be a new beginning for me. Senior account manager at Meridian Marketing meant a bigger paycheck, more responsibility, and the respect I'd been chasing for years. To celebrate, I suggested a team-building weekend, something to strengthen our bonds before diving into the Peterson account that could make or break our quarter. That's how the 5 of us ended up heading to Custer State Park in the heart of the Black Hills. "You're sure this camping thing is a good idea?" Marcus asked from the passenger seat, his fingers drumming nervously on the dashboard. "I haven't slept outdoors since I was 12. "It'll be fun," I assured him, though the gathering clouds outside our rental SUV looked anything but inviting. Besides, it's just 2 nights. In the back seat, Allison was scrolling through her phone. "Signal's getting spotty already," she reported. "So much for posting epic nature shots." "That's the point," Ryan said next to her. "Disconnect, reset. It's good for creativity." Tina, our newest team member, sat quietly by the window, watching the landscape change as we drove deeper into the hills. The dense ponderosa pines created shadows that seemed to reach toward our vehicle like grasping fingers. I first noticed something was off when we passed the sign for Needles Highway. My GPS had insisted we take this route, though I'd read somewhere that parts of it were closed for the season. The road narrowed, winding through granite spires that jutted from the earth like the spine of some ancient beast. The sky darkened overhead, not just from clouds, but as if the day itself was being swallowed by something hungry. "Jessica, are you sure this is right?" Allison asked, leaning forward. "This doesn't look like the way to the campground." I checked the GPS again. The screen flickered, then went blank before reloading with a route I didn't recognize. "That's weird," I muttered, slowing the SUV. "Let me pull over and check the map." "No signal," Marcus said, holding up his phone. "Great." I pulled to the shoulder, what little there was of it, and dug out the paper map I'd brought as a backup. According to it, we should have reached the Legion Lake campground 20 minutes ago, but the terrain around us looked nothing like what I'd expected. "We must have taken a wrong turn," I said, trying to sound confident. "We'll backtrack to the last junction." That's when we heard it. A low, moaning sound carried on the wind. Not quite human, not quite animal. "What was that?" Tina whispered, her first words in over an hour. "Probably just the wind," Ryan said, but I could hear the unease in his voice. I turned the SUV around, careful on the narrow road. As we headed back the way we came, fat raindrops began to pelt the windshield. Within minutes, it had become a downpour, water sluicing across the road in sheets. "Maybe we should find a lodge instead," Marcus suggested, his earlier nervousness now full-blown anxiety. "This is getting sketchy." I was about to agree when something darted across the road, a figure, hunched and swift. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV fishtailing on the wet pavement. "Jesus!" Allison shouted. "What was that?" "A deer," I said automatically, though what I'd seen had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Just a deer. We drove in tense silence after that, the rain hammering down, the wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear. I'd nearly convinced myself that we'd make it back to civilization when the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. No, no, no. I turned the key again and again. Nothing. Try checking under the hood, Ryan suggested, ever practical. I nodded, grabbing the flashlight from the glove compartment. I'll be right back. The moment I stepped outside, the rain soaked through my jacket. I made my way to the front of the vehicle, popped the hood, and shined the light on the engine. Steam rose from it, and there was a smell. Not just of wet metal and hot oil, but something else. Something rotten. That's when I saw the handprint on the inside of the hood. A small, black handprint, as if someone had dipped their palm in tar. It hadn't been there when we'd checked the oil back in Rapid City. A tapping sound made me jump. Marcus was at the passenger window gesturing for me to get back inside. I slammed the hood shut and hurried back to the driver's door. "There's a cabin," he said the moment I was back in. Ryan spotted it through the trees, not far off the road. "A cabin?" I wiped rain from my face. "Are you sure?" "I saw lights," Ryan confirmed. "Maybe a quarter-mile back. We passed it just before the car died." I hesitated. Strange cabins in the woods during storms were the stuff of horror movies, but so was being stranded on a remote road with night falling. "Okay," I decided, "we'll check it out. Grab anything essential. Phones, wallets, the emergency kit. We can come back for the rest if the place is legit." We huddled under the minimal shelter of the trees as we made our way back along the road. The rain had lessened slightly, but the wind had picked up, howling through the pines with a voice that sounded almost like words. The beam of our flashlight caught on something reflective ahead. A small sign nailed to a tree, with an arrow pointing down a barely visible path. "Hagen's Rest. Visitors welcome." "Visitors welcome?" Allison read aloud. "Well, that's not ominous at all." "It's either this or spend the night in a dead car," I reminded them. The path was slick with mud and pine needles, forcing us to go single file. I led the way, with Ryan bringing up the rear. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little daylight remained. Twice I thought I saw movement in the undergrowth, but when I aimed the flashlight, there was nothing but shadows. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized out of the forest itself. It was larger than I'd expected. Not a simple one-room structure, but a proper house built of dark logs, with a covered porch and windows that glowed with warm, yellow light. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth and shelter. "Hello?" I called as we approached the porch. "Anyone home? Our car broke down." The door opened before I could knock, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and eyes the pale blue of winter ice. He wore flannel and denim, like a walking stereotype of a mountain man, except for the polished silver pendant that hung around his neck, a strange symbol I didn't recognize. "Folks don't usually come up this way," he said, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly, especially not with a storm brewing. "Our GPS led us astray," I explained. "Then our car died. We saw your lights." He studied each of us in turn, his gaze lingering a beat too long on Tina, who shrank back slightly. "Well, can't leave you out in this weather. Name's Arthur Hagen. This place has been in my family for generations." He stepped aside, gesturing us in. "Come on then. The fire's warm, and I've got stew on the stove." The interior of the cabin was cozy and cluttered, wooden furniture worn smooth with age, bookshelves sagging under the weight of old volumes, and animal pelts draped over chairs and hanging from walls. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, and the smell of something savory came from a pot bubbling on an ancient-looking stove. "Make yourselves comfortable," Arthur said, gesturing to the seating around the fire. "I'll fetch some towels." As soon as he left the room, Marcus leaned in close. "We shouldn't stay here," he whispered. "This place gives me the creeps." "It's just old," Ryan countered, "and it's dry, and he's offering food." "I'm with Marcus," Tina said quietly. "Something feels wrong." I was inclined to agree. There was something off about Arthur, about this whole situation. But the storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows like it was trying to get in. "We'll stay until the storm passes," I decided. "First thing in the morning, we'll get help with the car." Arthur returned with towels and a tray bearing mugs of something steaming. "Herbal tea," he explained. "Good for the nerves. You all look shaken up." The tea had an unusual flavor, earthy with a hint of sweetness and something bitter underneath. Under Arthur's watchful eye, it seemed rude not to drink it, though I noticed Tina only pretended to sip hers. "You folks from the city?" Arthur asked, settling into a rocking chair by the fire. "Rapid City," I confirmed. "We were heading to Custer State Park for a camping trip." Arthur chuckled, the sound like dry leaves rustling. "Plenty of better places to camp than there. More interesting, anyway." "What do you mean?" Allison asked. Arthur's eyes glittered in the firelight. "The hills have secrets, young lady. The Lakota knew it. That's why they called this place Pahasapa, the Black Hills. Black not just for the pines that make them look dark from a distance, but for other reasons." He leaned forward. "Things happen here that can't be explained. People go missing. Sometimes they come back, changed." The way he said "changed" sent a chill down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. "Ghost stories?" Ryan asked, skepticism clear in his voice. "Call them what you will." Arthur shrugged. "But I'd wager you felt something on your way here, something watching. The hills have eyes, as the old saying goes." I remembered the figure that had darted across the road, the black handprint under the hood. My head felt fuzzy and the room seemed to sway slightly. "I think the tea's making me drowsy," I murmured. "Natural effect," Arthur assured me. "You've had a shock. Body's responding." I glanced at my companions. Marcus's eyelids were drooping, and Allison had already curled up on the sofa, her breathing slow and even. Only Ryan and Tina seemed alert, though Ryan's movements were becoming sluggish. "Perhaps you should rest," Arthur suggested. "I have rooms upstairs. Storm's not letting up anytime soon." The thought of climbing stairs seemed suddenly monumental. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts clouded. I heard Tina's voice, sharp with alarm, but it seemed to come from very far away. "What did you put in the tea?" she demanded. Arthur's smile never reached his eyes. "Just herbs, child. Just herbs that grow deep in the hills." The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the pendant around Arthur's neck beginning to glow with a sickly green light. I awoke to silence. No rain, no wind, just the quiet of a house sleeping. My mouth was dry, my head pounding. I was lying on a narrow bed in a small room lit only by moonlight streaming through an uncurtained window. My shoes had been removed, but I was otherwise fully dressed. Sitting up made the room spin, but I forced myself to swing my legs over the side of the bed. I needed to find the others, to make sure they were okay. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I made my way to the door, unlocked, thankfully. The hallway outside was dark, with several doors leading off it. I tried the nearest one, finding another bedroom similar to mine. Empty. The next room was the same. Where were my colleagues? A sound from downstairs drew my attention. A rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I crept toward the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the boards were less likely to creak. The main room was transformed. The comfortable furniture had been pushed aside, and the rug rolled back to reveal a wooden floor carved with the same symbol that had hung around Arthur's neck, an intricate design of interlocking circles and angular lines. Candles burned at specific points around the symbol, their flames unnaturally still in the otherwise drafty house. Arthur stood at the center of the symbol, but he was not alone. Tina knelt before him, her wrists bound, her head bowed. Of the others, there was no sign. "The offering must be willing," Arthur was saying, his voice different now, deeper, resonant with power. But minds can be changed. Hearts can be turned. Please, Tina whispered, let me go. Let us all go. No one leaves the hills once they've been chosen, Arthur replied. The Old One has already marked your friends. Even now, they walk the paths between worlds, their minds opening to new truths. I should have rushed in, should have tried to help Tina, but fear rooted me to the spot. Arthur raised a knife, not a kitchen knife, but an ancient-looking blade of dark stone, its edge wickedly sharp. With your blood, we will open the way, he intoned. With your fear, we will feed what waits beyond. A floorboard creaked beneath my foot, and Arthur's head snapped up. His eyes, once blue, now shone with that same sickly green light as his pendant. Ah, he said, smiling, another witness to the awakening. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me was no longer empty. Marcus stood there, but not the Marcus I knew. His movements were jerky, puppet-like, and his eyes were vacant. Behind him was Allison, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, a beatific smile frozen on her face. They've already been prepared, Arthur called to me, their minds hollowed out, ready to receive new tenants. The old ones need vessels to walk the world again. I backed away from Marcus and Allison, moving sideways toward the kitchen. If I could find a weapon, a phone, anything. Ryan stepped out of the shadows of the kitchen, blocking my escape. But unlike the others, his eyes were clear, aware. Run, he whispered, and then louder, she's getting away. He lunged at me, deliberately missing, creating chaos as Arthur shouted commands. In the confusion, I bolted for the front door, Ryan close behind me. The night outside was clear, the storm having passed, leaving the world washed clean and silvered with moonlight. We ran blindly into the forest, the sounds of pursuit fading behind us. What happened? I gasped when we finally stopped, lungs burning. What did he do to them? Ryan shook his head, bending over to catch his breath. I didn't drink the tea, he explained. Pretended to. Watched him drag the others off one by one. He's not alone, Jessica. There are others in the woods, all with those same glowing eyes. What about Tina? She didn't drink either, but they caught her trying to find a phone. I was looking for you when they brought her downstairs. A howl rose from the direction of the cabin. Not a wolf or coyote, but something with an almost human voice, twisted into something primal and hungry. We need to keep moving, Ryan urged. Find the road, flag down a car. But in the darkness of the woods, with no landmarks to guide us, finding the road proved impossible. Every tree looked the same, every rocky outcropping a mirror of the last. Even the stars seemed to shift overhead, constellations rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. As dawn approached, we stumbled upon a clearing dominated by a massive pine, its trunk wider than both of us could reach around. Carved into its bark was the same symbol from Arthur's pendant and floor. We've been going in circles, I realized, despair washing over me. No, Ryan insisted. We've been walking straight. This is something else. The sound of twigs snapping underfoot alerted us to someone's approach. We pressed ourselves against the far side of the giant pine, hardly daring to breathe. I know you're here, called a voice, not Arthur's but a woman's, aged and rough. I can help you, but you must trust me. We remained hidden, unconvinced. The man who took your friends, Arthur Hagen. He's been dead for 40 years, the woman continued. What wears his skin is something else, something old that lives in the depths of these hills. Slowly, I peered around the tree. An elderly woman stood in the clearing, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Her white hair was braided, and she wore practical outdoor clothing that had seen better days. Most striking were her eyes, milky with cataracts, obviously blind. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, she said, her unseeing eyes somehow finding us anyway. I track them, the ones who serve the old ones. I try to save who I can. How can you track anything? Ryan asked, still suspicious. "You're blind." Eleanor smiled grimly. "I see differently now. Come with me, quickly. They'll be hunting you as soon as the sun rises." Against my better judgment, we followed Eleanor as she picked her way through the forest with surprising speed and confidence for a blind woman. She led us to a small cabin built into the side of a hill, partially concealed by a growth of tangled vines. "My husband was taken by them 30 years ago," she explained as she ushered us inside. "Since then, I've made it my purpose to understand what we're dealing with, to fight it if I can." The interior of her cabin was the opposite of Arthur's: spare, functional, with none of the unsettling trophies or ancient artifacts. Maps covered one wall, marked with red pins and black crosses. "The pins are confirmed sightings," Eleanor explained, somehow sensing what had caught my attention. "The crosses are where people have vanished." There were dozens of crosses scattered across the map of the Black Hills region. "What exactly are we dealing with?" I asked. Eleanor sighed heavily. The Lakota shamans called it Iktomi Sapa, the black spider. Not literally a spider, but an entity that weaves webs between worlds, that catches the unwary and hollows them out. The settlers who came later had other names for it, or for its servants: Wendigo, Skinwalker. It's older than any of those stories. And Arthur? His followers? Ryan asked. People who made bargains, who offered sacrifices in exchange for power or long life. But the price is their humanity. Eleanor moved to a bookshelf, running her fingers over the spines until she found what she sought: a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. My husband's research. He was an anthropologist, studying local legends. He got too close to the truth. "What about our friends?" I pressed. "Can they be saved?" Eleanor's face grew grave. "If the transformation is complete, no. The person you knew is gone, replaced by something that only wears their face. But if it's not complete, if there's still something of them left, then perhaps." "How would we know?" "The eyes," she said simply. "When they're fully taken, the eyes glow green in darkness, like a predator's." I remembered Marcus and Allison, their vacant stares and jerky movements. Had their eyes glowed? I couldn't recall. "And how would we save them?" Ryan asked, a desperate edge to his voice. Eleanor opened the journal, turning pages until she found what she wanted. "According to my husband's research, the entity requires a connection to this world, a focal point for its power. In the old stories, it's always an object of significance, usually worn by the entity's chief servant." "Arthur's pendant," I realized. Eleanor nodded. "Destroy that, and the entity's hold is weakened. Those not fully transformed might be freed." "Might be," Ryan repeated flatly. "It's all I can offer," Eleanor said. "That and a way out of these woods, if you're willing to try." We spent the day at Eleanor's cabin, eating the simple food she provided and planning our return to Arthur's house. As the sun began to set, she gave us each a small pouch of herbs. "For protection," she explained. "It won't stop them, but it might confuse their senses long enough for you to act." She also gave Ryan a curved knife made of the same dark stone as Arthur's. "This was my husband's. Find the pendant, destroy it, then run. Don't wait to see what happens." Night had fallen by the time we approached Arthur's cabin. The windows glowed with that same golden light as before, warm and inviting, a facade hiding the horror within. We circled around back, finding a cellar door secured with a simple padlock that Ryan quickly broke with a rock. The cellar was dark and smelled of earth and something metallic. Blood, I realized with a lurch of my stomach. Eleanor's herbs hung heavy in pouches around our necks as we crept up the wooden stairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet, but not empty. Through the doorway to the main room, I could see Arthur seated before the fire, his back to us. Across from him sat what had once been Marcus and Allison, their postures unnaturally still. Of Tina, there was no sign. Ryan pointed to himself, then to Arthur, silently indicating his plan. I nodded, gripping a heavy cast-iron pan I'd taken from the kitchen as my only weapon. We were 3 steps into the room when Arthur spoke without turning. "I can smell her on you," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "The Blackwood woman. Did she fill your heads with lies about salvation, about hope?" He stood and faced us, and I had to stifle a scream. What had appeared as a normal, if weathered face in our first encounter was now clearly a mask, the skin too tight in some places, sagging in others, as if it didn't quite fit the skull beneath. And his eyes burned with that telltale green light, brighter now, almost radioactive in intensity. "Your friends have been most accommodating," Arthur continued, gesturing to Marcus and Allison. At his command, they stood, moving with the grace of marionettes. Soon they will be ready to receive their new tenants. As for the other one, he smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "She fought too hard, damaged the vessel, but waste not, want not." Ryan charged forward with a cry, the stone blade aimed at Arthur's chest where the pendant gleamed. Arthur moved with impossible speed for someone who appeared so elderly, sidestepping the attack and catching Ryan's wrist in a grip that made the bones creak. "Foolish," Arthur hissed, his face inches from Ryan's. "Did you think we wouldn't be prepared? That we haven't faced your kind before?" While they struggled, something moved in my peripheral vision. Marcus and Allison, advancing on me with the same mechanical precision. I swung the pan wildly, connecting with Marcus's shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the blow. Allison's hands closed around my throat, her grip inhumanly strong. As spots began to dance before my eyes, I caught sight of movement on the stairs. Tina, or what was left of her. Her movements were wrong, spider-like as if she had too many joints, and her neck was bent at an angle that should have been fatal. "The vessel was damaged," Arthur repeated, still holding Ryan immobile. "But not useless. The young one needs practice with human forms." With my fading strength, I reached for the pouch of herbs, tore it from my neck and shoved it into Allison's face. The reaction was immediate. She recoiled as if burned, her grip loosening enough for me to break free. Ryan had managed to free his hand and slashed at Arthur, opening a gash not in flesh but in what looked like a seam at his neck. Something dark and writhing pulsed beneath, visible for just a moment before the skin knit itself back together. "The pendant!" I screamed, ducking under Marcus's outstretched arms. "Get the pendant!" Ryan changed tactics, abandoning the attempt to wound Arthur and instead grabbing for the silver symbol that hung at his chest. Arthur howled, a sound no human throat could make, and in that moment of distraction I snatched a burning log from the fire and thrust it toward him. The flames caught on his clothing, spreading with unnatural speed. Arthur thrashed, the fire illuminating the cabin in hellish light. Ryan finally tore the pendant free, its chain breaking with a sound like a gunshot. "Run!" he shouted, shoving me toward the door. We burst out into the night, the sounds of inhuman screaming following us. Behind us, the cabin was engulfed in flames, silhouettes moving within the inferno, some human-shaped, others decidedly not. Ryan clutched the pendant, its green light pulsing against his skin like something alive. "What do we do with it?" he gasped as we ran. "Destroy it," I panted. "That's what Eleanor said." We reached the massive pine with the carved symbol, the same one we'd found earlier. Ryan placed the pendant on a flat rock at the base of the tree and brought the stone knife down on it with all his strength. The pendant shattered with a sound like the world tearing apart. Green light exploded outward, briefly illuminating the forest in sickly brilliance before collapsing back in on itself. A shock wave knocked us off our feet, and then silence. We lay there, gasping, the night suddenly ordinary around us. No otherworldly screams, no sense of being watched, just insects and the distant call of an owl. "Did it work?" Ryan whispered. Before I could answer, footsteps approached. Uneven, stumbling. We scrambled to our feet, ready to run again. but it was Marcus who emerged from the trees. His eyes were clear, confused, his movements his own again. "Jessica?" he mumbled, swaying on his feet. "What happened? Where are we?" Allison appeared behind him, similarly disoriented. They had no memory of anything after drinking the tea, no awareness of what they had nearly become. Of Tina, there was no sign. Dawn found us walking along a road, a real road this time, not the mysterious path that had led us to Arthur's cabin. A trucker stopped for us, his face concerned as he took in our filthy, exhausted appearance. He drove us to the ranger station at Custer State Park where we reported Tina missing. The search went on for weeks. Teams combed the area where we told them Arthur's cabin had been, but they found nothing. No ruins, no cellar, not even a foundation. Eleanor Blackwood's cabin was similarly absent, though records did show that an Eleanor and Thomas Blackwood had owned property in the area 30 years prior, before Thomas's disappearance. As for Tina, they found scraps of her clothing 3 miles from where we'd last seen her, but nothing else. The official report listed her as a probable animal attack victim, though no body was ever recovered. Marcus and Allison recovered physically, but something in them had changed. They were quieter, more subdued, and neither of them could stand to be in dark rooms. They left the company within a month of our return. Ryan and I stayed. We had experienced something together that no one else could understand. Sometimes, late at night, I catch him looking at his hands as if expecting to see that sickly green glow bleeding through his skin. I know because I do the same. I've been researching the Black Hills ever since, tracking disappearances, unusual events. There are patterns there, cycles that repeat every 40 years or so. Eleanor was right. Something old lives in those hills, something that weaves between worlds. And I can't help but wonder, as I lie awake at night listening to the wind against my window, if what we destroyed was truly the entity's connection to our world, or merely one of many. If Arthur was just one servant of many. If somewhere in the Black Hills, what used to be Tina is learning to wear her skin more convincingly, preparing for the day when the cycle begins again. My name is Jessica Davis, and this is my warning. If you go camping in the Black Hills and find yourself on a road that isn't on any map, turn back. If you see a cabin with warm, welcoming lights when there should be no shelter for miles, keep walking. And if a kind old man offers you tea on a stormy night, run. Run, and don't look back. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the rugged Badlands of South Dakota last summer, during what was supposed to be a meditative solo hiking trip to clear my head after my divorce. I'd always been the independent type, more comfortable with solitude than most, but what I experienced in those desolate formations would forever change how I perceive silence and isolation. I had meticulously planned my 5-day trek through the remote northeastern section of Badlands National Park, an area with minimal tourist traffic and stunning otherworldly terrain. The eroded buttes and spires created a landscape that seemed almost alien, perfect for someone seeking to disconnect from everyday life and find perspective. At least that's what I told myself. My friends thought I was crazy for going alone. The Badlands aren't a place for solo hikers, my best friend Tara had warned, especially not the backcountry. People get lost out there, Em. But I'd brushed off their concerns with practiced confidence. I was experienced, prepared, and honestly, I craved the challenge almost as much as the solitude. The first day went exactly as planned. I parked my car at the Sage Creek Wilderness Area trailhead, shouldered my pack, and set off into the strange, stark beauty of the Badlands. The May weather was perfect. Warm days, cool nights, and clear skies that promised good visibility. I made excellent time, covering nearly 10 miles before setting up camp on a small plateau overlooking a maze of steep-walled canyons. That first night was peaceful. I sat outside my tent eating rehydrated pasta, watching the sunset paint the stratified rock formations in fiery oranges and deep purples. The stars appeared one by one until the sky was awash with them, more than I'd ever seen back in Minneapolis. I felt small but content, exactly what I'd been searching for. The trouble began on the second day. I woke to a strange scratching sound outside my tent. Probably just a small animal, I told myself, though the sound seemed to move with an unsettling rhythm. 3 scratches, pause, 3 scratches, pause. I unzipped the tent flap cautiously but found nothing. The packed earth around my tent was undisturbed. No tracks, no sign of whatever had made the noise. I shook off my unease and broke camp, eager to reach a landmark I'd circled on my map, a distinctive formation locals called the Devil's Pulpit. The guidebook described it as a natural stone column rising from a circular depression, looking unnervingly like a speaker's podium overlooking an amphitheater. It wasn't on most tourist maps, which made it all the more appealing to me. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, I began to notice small oddities. Twice I found myself having to backtrack when landmarks didn't match my map. The first time, I assumed I'd simply misidentified a butte. The second time, I double-checked my GPS only to find it glitching, showing me moving in circles when I knew I'd been walking straight for hours. "Technology," I muttered, giving the device a frustrated tap. I switched it off to save battery and relied on my compass instead. By midday, the temperature had risen to uncomfortable levels. The sun beat down mercilessly on the exposed rock, and despite my wide-brimmed hat and sunscreen, I could feel my skin burning. I stopped in a narrow canyon that offered some shade and sat on a smooth boulder to eat lunch and conserve energy during the hottest part of the day. That's when I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the rock formations. The Badlands are known for their eerie acoustics. But as I sat perfectly still taking a swig from my water bottle, I realized the sound had words. Not distinct enough to make out, but definitely human cadence and tone. I froze, water halfway to my lips. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Is someone there?" Nothing. Just the distant cry of a hawk. I packed up quickly, suddenly uncomfortable with the closeness of the canyon walls. The guidebook had mentioned that the Dakota people considered parts of the Badlands sacred ground, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. I'd found it poetically beautiful when reading it in my living room. Now, miles from any other human, it felt distinctly unsettling. By late afternoon, I finally found the Devil's Pulpit. The formation was even more striking than the guidebook had described. A perfect circular depression about 40 feet across, with smooth, sloping sides that led down to a flat center. Rising from one side was a column of striated rock that did indeed look unnervingly like a pulpit or podium. The geological explanation was that it was simply a more resistant piece of rock that had withstood erosion. But standing at the rim, looking down into that perfect circle, it was hard not to feel like it was designed for some purpose. I decided to make camp on the rim rather than down in the depression. Something about the idea of sleeping in that bowl-like formation made me uneasy. As I set up my tent, I noticed small arrangements of stones scattered along the rim. 3 stones in a triangle, then 3 more a few feet away, and another 3. They looked deliberately placed. Probably just previous hikers, I told myself aloud, finding comfort in the sound of my own voice in the growing silence. That night, the temperature dropped drastically. I huddled in my sleeping bag, grateful for the extra layers I'd packed. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the rock formations with an almost vocal quality. I tried to focus on the beautiful stars visible through my tent's mesh ceiling, but the sound kept pulling at my attention. It didn't sound entirely like wind anymore. I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke suddenly in the pitch darkness to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lay perfectly still, straining to listen. The steps paused near my head, and then I heard that scratching again. 3 scratches. Pause, 3 scratches. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin with fear. The scratching stopped immediately. Then came the whispers, closer now, just outside the thin nylon of my tent. Still indistinct, but clearly multiple voices overlapping, speaking rapidly in a language I didn't recognize. I fumbled for my flashlight with trembling hands and shone it through the tent walls, casting strange, distorted shadows. Nothing visible moved outside. I worked up the courage to unzip the tent a few inches and point the beam out into the night. Empty darkness greeted me. The wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness. I swept the light around the perimeter of my tent. No footprints in the hard-packed earth. No sign anyone had been there. But when I aimed the light toward the Devil's Pulpit, I felt my blood turn to ice. Standing at the stone column was a figure. At this distance, I could only make out a silhouette, tall and unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still at the pulpit. The beam of my flashlight didn't seem to illuminate it properly. The light appeared to bend around it, leaving it in shadow despite being in direct line of my flash. I slammed the tent zipper closed and burrowed into my sleeping bag, heart racing. Part of me argued this was impossible. I was alone in the wilderness. It had to be a trick of light, a strange rock formation I was misinterpreting in my half-awake state. The rational explanation was that I was experiencing sleep paralysis or a particularly vivid nightmare. But I knew I was fully awake. And those whispers still lingered, now seeming to come from the direction of the pulpit. I didn't sleep again that night. I kept my flashlight on until the batteries began to dim, then switched to my backup. When the first gray light of dawn finally crept across the sky, I was still huddled in my sleeping bag, exhausted but too terrified to close my eyes. With daylight came courage, or at least enough of it to peek outside. The Devil's Pulpit stood empty. No sign of the figure I'd seen. The stone arrangements along the rim, however, had changed. They now formed a continuous circle around the depression, hundreds of small rocks perfectly spaced. I packed up camp in record time, hands shaking so badly I struggled with the tent poles. I needed to get back to civilization, back to my car. I'd planned to spend 3 more days in the backcountry, but one sleepless night filled with inexplicable phenomena was enough. I could write it off as an overactive imagination triggered by isolation, but I wasn't sticking around to test that theory. I consulted my map, plotting the quickest route back to the trailhead. According to my calculations, if I pushed hard, I could make it back to my car by nightfall. It would be exhausting, but the alternative, another night out here, was unthinkable. The day started badly and got worse. My GPS still wouldn't work properly, the screen showing coordinates that jumped wildly from one moment to the next. My phone had no signal, which I'd expected, but now it was also rapidly losing battery despite being fully charged the day before. I relied on my map and compass, but even these seemed unreliable. Landmarks I should have passed never appeared. Formations I didn't recognize loomed where empty space should have been. By midday, I had the sickening realization that I was not getting closer to the trailhead. I was moving deeper into the wilderness. When I stopped to rest and check my bearings for the dozenth time, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The water in my bottle, which had been crystal clear that morning, now had a reddish-brown tinge to it. I cautiously sniffed it. The metallic scent of blood hit my nostrils, and I flung the bottle away with a cry of disgust. I breathed deeply, trying to calm myself. "You're dehydrated and starting to hallucinate," I said aloud. "Get it together, Emily." But when I retrieved the bottle, the water still looked contaminated. I had another full bottle in my pack that seemed untouched, so I decided to continue, promising myself I'd filter more water at the next creek I crossed. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to seem increasingly hostile. The path narrowed into tight passages between towering rock walls that blocked the sun. The temperature dropped dramatically in these shadowed corridors, and I found myself shivering despite the exertion of hiking. The silence was absolute in these passages. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind. In one particularly narrow canyon, I noticed scratch marks on the rock walls at about shoulder height. 3 parallel lines, repeated at regular intervals. They looked fresh, the exposed rock lighter than the weathered surface around it. I ran my fingers over one set of marks and jerked my hand back. The rock was warm to the touch, almost hot, as if the scratches had just been made. That's when I heard the whispers again, echoing from further down the canyon. This time, they were louder, more insistent. I still couldn't make out words, but the tone had changed from the previous night. These whispers sounded urgent, beckoning. Against all better judgment, I found myself moving toward them. It was as if my feet were disconnected from my brain, carrying me forward while every instinct screamed to turn back. The canyon narrowed further until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through a passage barely wider than my body. Claustrophobia clutched at my chest, making each breath shallow and painful. The passage opened suddenly into a circular chamber, eerily similar to the depression around the Devil's Pulpit, but enclosed overhead by a dome of rock with a small opening that let in a single shaft of sunlight. The chamber was perfectly round, the walls smooth as if carved by hand rather than eroded by natural forces. In the center of the chamber stood a small stone cairn, rocks balanced precariously one on top of another. At the base of the cairn lay something that made my blood freeze, a backpack identical to mine, weathered and faded as if it had been exposed to the elements for months. I approached slowly, the whispers now a constant background noise reverberating from all directions. When I reached the backpack, I saw a name written on the inner flap in permanent marker. Emily Hall. My name. My handwriting. But I'd never been here before. My own pack was still on my back. I could feel its weight. With trembling hands, I opened the weathered pack. Inside was a journal I recognized as mine, though much more worn than the one I'd packed. I opened it to find my handwriting filling pages I didn't remember writing, detailing a trip to the Badlands I hadn't yet completed. The final entry read, Day 5. I keep ending up back at the chamber. No matter which direction I walk, I return here. The whispers are getting louder. They say they've been waiting for me. They say I've always been here. The date on the entry was tomorrow's date. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me and backed away from the cairn. The whispers crescendoed, and now I could make out words. My name, over and over, in dozens of overlapping voices. The shaft of light illuminating the cairn began to dim, though I knew it couldn't be sunset yet. As the light faded, I saw movement in the deepest shadows of the chamber. Tall, thin figures began to emerge, their forms seeming to waver like heat mirages. They had the basic shape of humans but moved with an unnatural fluidity, as if their joints bent in impossible ways. Their faces were indistinct, features shifting and melting into one another. Not real, I whispered, pressing myself against the chamber wall. Not real. One figure separated from the others and approached me. As it drew closer, its face began to resolve into recognizable features. My features. But wrong, somehow. The proportions slightly off, the eyes too large and entirely black, the smile too wide for a human face. We've been waiting. Emily, it said with my voice, but overlaid with dozens of other whispers. You're home now. I ran. I don't remember finding my way out of the chamber or navigating the narrow canyon. I only remember running until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, then crawling until I could run again. The sun was setting by the time I collapsed, physically unable to go any further. I found myself on a small plateau overlooking a labyrinth of canyons that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Nothing looked familiar. My map was gone, lost somewhere in my panicked flight. My GPS and phone were both dead. The only water I had left was the second bottle, and I was afraid to drink from it now. As darkness fell, I huddled against a rock, too terrified to set up my tent. I didn't want anything between me and the sky, didn't want to risk being enclosed again. The stars appeared one by one, but they didn't look right. The constellations were wrong, patterns I didn't recognize. The whispers returned with the darkness, seeming to rise from the very rock I leaned against. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it made no difference. The sound seemed to bypass my ears entirely, manifesting directly in my mind. "Please," I begged to the empty air. "Please, leave me alone." A response came immediately, not in whispers but in a clear, singular voice that seemed to originate from right beside me. "We can't leave you alone, Emily. You're one of us now." I turned to find an old woman sitting beside me. Her appearance so sudden I gasped and scrambled away. She looked ordinary enough at first glance. White hair pulled back in a severe bun, deeply lined face, clothes that seemed both modern and oddly timeless. But her eyes reflected the starlight like a cat's, gleaming with an unnatural sheen. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear and thirst. "The locals call me Agnes," she said, her voice raspy but strong. "But I've had many names over the years, just as this place has had many names before Badlands." She gestured to the vast expanse of canyons below us. The Lakota called it Mako Sika, land bad. But they understood what it truly was, a thin place, a place where worlds touch. "I don't understand," I said, though a horrible suspicion was forming in my mind. Agnes smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "Some people are drawn here. People like you, Emily. People who feel disconnected, who seek solitude, who stand at a crossroads in their lives." She leaned closer. "The Badlands calls to them, and once it calls, it doesn't let go." "The backpack," I whispered. "The journal. How—" "Time moves differently here," Agnes interrupted. "Past, present, future. They're not as separate as you think. You've been coming here for years. You will come here for years more. You've always been here, in a way." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going home." Agnes laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Oh, Emily, haven't you realized yet? The path that brought you here doesn't lead back out. It never did." She reached out suddenly and grasped my wrist. Her touch was ice-cold and impossibly strong. "The others are waiting for you at the pulpit. They've been preparing for your arrival." "Others?" I managed to ask. "All those who heard the whispers and followed. All those who sought solitude and found eternity instead." Her grip tightened. "The Badlands needs voices. Emily. New whispers to call others. That's the price of passage." With surprising strength, she pulled me to my feet. "Come now. The ceremony begins at midnight." Something in her words broke through my fear-paralyzed mind. Ceremony. Midnight. Classic horror movie setups. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, a slightly hysterical giggle bubbling up from my chest. That laughter seemed to startle Agnes. Her grip loosened just enough for me to wrench my arm free and stumble backward. "No," I said, finding strength in my voice I didn't know I had left. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Agnes's face contorted, the human facade slipping to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. "You don't have a choice, Emily Hall. The Badlands has chosen you." "Watch me," I spat and turned to run. I expected her to chase me, but when I glanced back, Agnes was simply standing there, watching me with those reflective eyes. Her voice carried clearly through the night air. "Run all you want, Emily. All paths lead back to the pulpit. We'll be waiting." I ran anyway, down from the plateau, into the maze of canyons, guided only by moonlight and desperation. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, then walked, then ran again when I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Hours passed. The moon tracked across the sky. I should have been hopelessly lost in the labyrinth of stone, but somehow I kept finding passages that seemed vaguely familiar. And then, as the moon began to sink toward the horizon, I emerged from a narrow canyon and found myself staring at the Devil's Pulpit, exactly where I'd started. and they were waiting for me. Dozens of figures stood in the circular depression, arranged in concentric rings around the stone pulpit. Some looked almost normal, people of various ages dressed in hiking gear from different eras. Others were like Agnes, human in form but wrong in subtle, nauseating ways. Limbs too long, movements too fluid, eyes that reflected moonlight like animals. At the pulpit itself stood the figure I'd seen the night before, my doppelganger, but now I could see it clearly. It wore my face like an ill-fitting mask, the features slightly asymmetrical, the smile too wide and full of teeth that no human mouth should contain. They all turned to look at me as I emerged from the canyon. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply waited, expectant. I knew I should run again. Find another path. Keep trying until sunrise, at least. But exhaustion had set in, bone deep and overwhelming. I hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. I hadn't had water since mid-afternoon. My legs trembled with fatigue. "What do you want from me?" I called out, my voice echoing in the unnatural silence. My doppelganger spoke, its mouth moving wrong, as if the words and the movements weren't quite synchronized. "We want you to join us, Emily, to add your voice to ours, to help us call others to this place." "Why?" I demanded. "Why me?" "Because you were listening," it replied simply. "Because you came seeking silence but heard our whispers instead. Because you're standing at a crossroads, neither here nor there. The perfect vessel." It extended a hand that was almost but not quite human. The fingers too long, the joints too flexible. "Come to the pulpit, Emily. Take your place. Become eternal." I stood frozen at the edge of the depression, caught between fear and a strange, horrifying temptation. Part of me wanted to descend those smooth slopes, to approach the pulpit, to see what waited on the other side of this nightmare. Would it be so bad to become one with this ancient place? To never be alone again? That thought broke the spell. I hadn't come to the Badlands to escape loneliness. I'd come to embrace solitude, to find strength in independence. Whatever these things were offering, it wasn't what I sought. "No," I said firmly, "I don't belong here." A ripple of whispers passed through the gathered figures. My doppelganger's face contorted in anger, the mask of my features slipping to reveal something insectile beneath. "Then you will be taken," it hissed, voice no longer mimicking mine but a chorus of discordant whispers. The figures began to move toward the slope where I stood, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, like puppets with tangled strings. I backed away, but found myself against the rock wall of the canyon I'd emerged from. There was nowhere to run. In desperation, I grabbed my emergency flare from my belt pouch, the one piece of equipment I hadn't lost in my panicked flight. I struck it against the rock wall and it ignited with a blinding crimson glare. The effect was immediate and shocking. The figures nearest to me recoiled with inhuman shrieks, their forms seeming to waver and distort in the harsh chemical light. Even at a distance, the others covered their eyes or turned away, their outlines blurring as if the light itself was dissolving them. Only my doppelganger remained steady at the pulpit, fixing me with eyes that now glowed with a cold blue light. It raised a hand, and I felt pressure building around me, an invisible force trying to drag me down the slope toward the gathered figures. I fought against it, bracing my feet and holding the flare higher. "You can't have me," I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. The pressure increased, nearly bringing me to my knees. The flare's light began to dim, its chemical burn almost spent. In moments, I would be defenseless again. Then I remembered something from the Dakota legends I'd read, their belief that these spirits, these thin place entities, couldn't cross running water. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was all I had. I took the last of my water and poured it in a circle around myself, just as the flare sputtered and died. The pressure ceased immediately, as if I'd stepped through an invisible barrier. The gathered figures froze, unable or unwilling to cross that simple line of water. My doppelganger's face contorted with rage. "This changes nothing," it hissed. "You cannot leave. All paths lead back to us." "We'll see about that," I replied, though I had no plan beyond this momentary reprieve. As if in answer to my desperate hope, the eastern sky began to lighten. Not yet dawn, but the first promise of it. The figures seemed to notice it too, their attention shifting from me to the horizon. "Dawn comes," my doppelganger said, its voice now urgent. "Make your choice, Emily. Join us willingly or wander these canyons until madness claims you and you crawl back to us, begging for release." I said nothing, watching the sky grow incrementally lighter. The figures began to retreat, moving back toward the pulpit. Even my doppelganger seemed less substantial, its edges blurring in the growing light. "You cannot escape," it called to me, voice fading. "The Badlands has marked you. We will be waiting when darkness falls again." And then they were gone, melting into the shadows or simply ceasing to be. I stood alone at the rim of the Devil's Pulpit as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the bizarre landscape. I didn't wait to see if the entities would return with nightfall. I started walking as soon as I could see clearly, choosing a direction and sticking to it, ignoring the paths that tried to turn me back toward the pulpit. I rationed my remaining water carefully, knowing dehydration was now a more immediate threat than supernatural beings. By midday, I stumbled upon something I hadn't dared hope for, a hiking trail with actual footprints, human footprints, recent ones. I followed them doggedly, forcing myself to keep moving despite exhaustion and thirst. Late in the afternoon, I emerged from the wilderness to find a park ranger station. The ranger on duty, Rob Keller, took one look at my condition and immediately radioed for medical assistance. As he helped me into the station and gave me water, he asked what had happened. I gave him the sanitized version. Got lost, GPS failed, ran out of water. He nodded sympathetically, used to dealing with hikers who underestimated the harshness of the Badlands. "You're lucky," he said. "Another day out there without water, and we'd be organizing a recovery operation instead of a rescue." I managed a weak smile. I had some help finding my way out. "Oh, you run into another hiker?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Just found the right path." Rob gave me an odd look. "Well, you're the second solo hiker we've had come out of that section this month. Other woman wasn't in nearly as good shape as you, though. Still in the hospital in Rapid City, last I heard." My blood ran cold. What happened to her? "Severe dehydration, exposure, and..." He lowered his voice. "Psychological trauma. Keeps talking about whispers and doppelgangers. Doctors think it was heat-induced hallucinations." I said nothing, but my hand unconsciously went to my wrist, where 5 bruises marked the spots where Agnes's fingers had gripped me. "Anyway," Rob continued, "paramedics should be here soon. We'll get you checked out, and then I can drive you back to your car tomorrow." I thanked him and sat quietly, sipping water and trying to process what had happened. Had it all been hallucinations brought on by dehydration and isolation? The rational part of my brain wanted desperately to believe that, but the bruises on my wrist were real. The water that turned to blood was real. The journal with entries I hadn't written yet, that was real too. I never went back to collect my abandoned gear. I told Rob I'd left it near Deer Haven, miles from the Devil's Pulpit, and he promised a ranger would try to retrieve it. I didn't care if they found it or not. I just wanted to be sure no one would go looking near that particular formation. It's been a year since my experience in the Badlands. I've moved from Minneapolis to Seattle, as far from South Dakota as I could reasonably get. I've seen therapists who nod understandingly when I talk about post-traumatic stress and the power of the mind to create explanations for life-threatening situations. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. And sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment and the night is particularly quiet, I hear them again, the whispers. They're fainter here, on the edge of the continent, but they find me in the spaces between sounds, in the moments between heartbeats. They're waiting for me. They've always been waiting. And sometimes I catch my reflection moving a half-second too slowly, smiling when I'm not smiling, watching me with eyes that don't quite look like mine. Dawn always banishes these moments. But I know, deep in my bones, that what waits in the Badlands doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. And one day, I'll turn a corner in Seattle and find myself back on that plateau with the Devil's Pulpit waiting below and Agnes smiling her too-sharp smile, saying, "Welcome home, Emily." Because that's the truth I can't escape. Once the Badlands calls you, you're never truly free. You've always been there. You always will be. The thin places make you part of them, and they never, ever let go.